They called him the Ghost, the janitor who moved through Preston Tower like he didn't exist. For 3 years, Miles Carter pushed his yellow cart past executives who wouldn't meet his eyes, past assistants who complained about streaks on the glass, past security guards who treated him like furniture. They had no idea that the quiet man with calloused hands once had a different title, Captain. They didn't know about the medals locked in a storage unit or the scars hidden beneath his gray uniform. They laughed at him, until the night everything changed and the CEO's life hung in the balance. Follow this story to the end and comment with your city below so I can see how far this journey has traveled. The rain started at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October, the kind of Chicago storm that arrives without warning and turns the evening sky the color of old bruises. Miles Carter heard it before he saw it. The first drops hitting the massive glass panels of Preston Tower's lobby like scattered applause, then building to a steady drumbeat that echoed through 47 floors of steel and ambition. He was on the 32nd floor when the storm broke, emptying a trash bin outside the marketing department. The fluorescent lights above him flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the city transform, headlights blurring into streams of red and white as commuters rushed for shelter. Lightning split the darkening sky, and for just a moment, Miles's reflection in the glass looked like someone else, someone younger, harder, wearing desert camouflage instead of a janitor's gray uniform. He blinked, and the ghost was gone. "Yo, Carlos," a voice called out behind him. "Check this out. The janitor's daydreaming again, probably thinking about his big promotion to lead mop operator." Laughter erupted from the break room where 3 junior executives sat around a table littered with takeout containers and empty energy drink cans. Miles recognized them, Tyler Vance, fresh out of business school with his father's law firm on speed dial. Marcus Webb, whose LinkedIn profile bragged about disrupting traditional market paradigms. And Stephanie Chen, who wore designer heels that cost more than Miles's monthly rent. Tyler leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Seriously though, how long you been pushing that cart around? 3 years? 4? That's dedication to mediocrity, my man." Miles continued tying up the trash bag, his movement steady and practiced. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was often the best response. Back in Afghanistan during his 3rd tour, his team had a saying, "Let your actions make the noise." It had kept him alive through ambushes, firefights, and the kind of political chaos that turned brothers in arms into strangers. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Tyler persisted, standing up now, emboldened by his audience. At 26, he'd never been ignored by someone he considered beneath him. "You speak English? Or should I try Spanish? Hablas español?" "He speaks English just fine," said a voice from the corridor. Crisp, calm, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "And if you spent half as much time on the Morrison account as you do harassing the staff, we might actually hit our quarterly targets." Isabella Grant stood in the doorway of the break room, one hand holding her tablet, the other adjusting the collar of her charcoal blazer. At 38, she'd earned her position as CEO through 17 years of climbing the corporate ladder. One difficult decision at a time. She'd started in the mailroom of a competitor, worked her way through analyst positions, survived 3 company mergers, and finally landed at Preston Holdings 6 months ago with a mandate to turn around a struggling division. Tyler's smirk evaporated. "Ms. Grant, You were just leaving," Isabella finished. "All of you. It's after 7. Go home." The 3 executives scrambled to gather their belongings, shooting glances at Miles as they hurried past. Stephanie muttered something about "can't even take a joke anymore," but she kept moving. When they were gone, Isabella turned to Miles. "I apologize for that. There's no excuse for disrespect." Miles looked up, surprised by the directness of her apology. Most executives at Preston Tower wouldn't have noticed the exchange, let alone intervened. "It's nothing I haven't heard before, ma'am." "That doesn't make it acceptable." She studied him for a moment, and Miles got the sense she was actually seeing him, not as furniture or background noise, but as a person. "You're Miles, right? Miles Carter?" "Yes, ma'am." "You've been here 3 years?" 3 years, 2 months. Isabella nodded slowly. "And you work the evening shift alone?" "Usually, yes. The day crew handles the heavy cleaning. I do maintenance, trash collection, floor care, keeps the building ready for the next morning. Long hours. Quiet ones, Miles said, which was true. After the chaos of combat, after the noise and pressure and constant vigilance, he'd craved silence the way some men craved whiskey. The evening shift at Preston Tower offered exactly that. Empty corridors, humming HVAC systems, and the simple clarity of tasks that had beginnings and endings. Isabella seemed to understand something in his answer, though she didn't press.
Well, thank you for what you do. This building runs because of people like you. She glanced at her watch, a practical Seiko, not the luxury brands favored by other executives. I've got a few more hours of work. Have a good evening, Miles. You too, Ms. Grant. She headed toward the executive elevators, her heels clicking a steady rhythm against the polished marble. Miles watched her go, noting details the way he'd been trained to. Confident posture, slight tension in her shoulders suggesting stress or fatigue, situational awareness marked by the way she scanned the corridor before stepping into the elevator. Leadership under pressure. He'd known officers like her, the kind who led from the front, who remembered the names of supply sergeants and comms specialists, who understood that respect flowed both ways regardless of rank. Miles returned to his cart and continued his rounds. The 32nd floor was quiet now, just the soft whir of printers in sleep mode and the occasional ping of elevator arrivals. Most people had left by 6:30, beating the worst of rush hour. By 7:15, Preston Tower was a glass monument to emptiness, its hundreds of workstations and conference rooms waiting in the dark for tomorrow's occupants. He moved through the space with practiced efficiency, emptying bins, wiping down surfaces, checking that doors were locked and lights were switched off. The work was meditative in its way, requiring just enough attention to keep his mind occupied, but not so much that he couldn't let it wander. Tonight, though, his mind kept circling back to Isabella Grant. She was different from her predecessor, Marcus Holloway, who'd treated the staff with the casual contempt of someone who'd inherited wealth and assumed it came with superiority. Holloway had lasted 18 months before the board forced him out, his tenure marked by declining revenues and a sexual harassment scandal that had cost Preston Holdings $12 million in settlements. Isabella had arrived in April with a reputation for turning around troubled divisions. She'd cut unnecessary expenses, reorganized reporting structures, and most importantly, listened. Miles had overheard conversations in conference rooms where she actually asked questions instead of monologuing about her vision. The employees seemed cautiously optimistic, though 3 months was barely enough time to judge whether new leadership would stick or fade. Still, intervening on behalf of a janitor? That was unusual. Most executives operated on a different frequency, their attention reserved for board meetings and client presentations. They literally looked past people like Miles, their eyes sliding over uniforms and name tags without really registering the humans wearing them. He'd experienced the same dynamic in the military, actually. Officers who saw enlisted personnel as tools versus officers who saw them as teammates. The difference was often life or death in combat zones. Miles reached the executive floor, 47, just after 7:30 p.m. This was his least favorite part of the building, all glass-walled offices and expensive art, the kind of space designed to intimidate rather than inspire. The carpet here was thicker, the lighting more sophisticated, the air conditioning set to a precise 68 degrees regardless of season. He started with the south corridor, working his way past offices belonging to the CFO, COO, and various vice presidents whose titles he'd never fully understood. VP of Strategic Initiatives, Senior Director of Operational Excellence, Chief Innovation Officer. In his experience, the longer the title, the less clear the actual job. Isabella's office was at the north end, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Miles could see light spilling from her doorway, hear the faint clack of keyboard strokes. He'd empty her trash last, giving her privacy while he worked the rest of the floor. He was wiping down a conference table in the main boardroom when he heard the elevator chime. Not unusual. Security made rounds every 2 hours, and occasionally workaholics returned after dinner to finish projects. But something in the quality of the sound made Miles pause. Maybe it was the hour, or the storm rattling the windows, or instincts honed by years of listening for threats in the dark. He moved to the corridor, staying in the shadows.
Two figures stepped out of the elevator, and Miles knew immediately they didn't belong. The first was tall, mid-30s, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. The second was shorter, stockier, moving with the jerky energy of someone running on adrenaline or drugs. Neither wore visitor badges. Neither carried the easy confidence of people who belonged in Preston Tower after hours. The tall one pulled something from his jacket. Miles caught the glint of metal in the dim emergency lighting that illuminated the corridors when most offices were dark. A gun. Miles's heart rate didn't spike. That was one of the strange gifts of combat experience, the ability to stay calm when circumstances screamed for panic. His mind shifted into assessment mode, cataloging details. Two suspects, at least one armed. Element of surprise lost the moment they exited the elevator. Civilian in potential danger, no backup available. Distance to nearest exit, approximately 120 feet. The intruders moved toward Isabella's office with purpose. This wasn't random. They knew where they were going. Miles had three options: hide and call security, confront them directly, or find another way to intervene. The first option gave them time to harm Isabella. The second option was suicide. He had a mop, they had a gun. The third option required improvisation. He chose option 3. Moving quickly but silently, Miles returned to his cart and grabbed his phone, dialing 911 as he followed the intruders at a distance. The operator answered on the second ring. 911? What's your emergency? Armed break-in at Preston Tower, 233 West Wacker Drive, 47th floor, Miles said quietly. Two suspects, at least one firearm, civilian in danger. I'm maintenance staff, staying on the line. Sir, are you in a safe location? No, stay on the line. He pocketed the phone, leaving the connection open, and moved closer. Through the glass walls of Isabella's office, he could see the situation unfolding. The tall one had his gun trained on Isabella, who'd stood up from her desk, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The shorter one was yanking cords from her computer, shouting something Miles couldn't quite hear. Isabella's face was pale but composed, the same expression he'd seen on officers under fire, the look of someone forcing themselves to stay functional despite terror. Miles assessed the office layout. Single entry point, glass walls offering visibility but no cover, desk positioned near the windows, 2 leather chairs for visitors, bookshelf against the west wall. The intruders had their backs to the door, focused entirely on Isabella. He had maybe 30 seconds before they noticed him. Miles's hands moved automatically to the mop handle on his cart, testing its weight and balance. It was aluminum, 3/4 of an inch in diameter, with a threaded connection where the mop head attached. Not a weapon, but it would have to do. He thought about the last time he'd faced armed opponents without a firearm himself. A checkpoint outside Kandahar, where insurgents had tried to overrun their position during a sandstorm. His rifle had jammed, and he'd gone hand-to-hand with 2 attackers before backup arrived. He'd won that fight through speed, surprise, and the kind of training that turned reflexes into muscle memory. Of course, he'd been 32 then, not 44. His left knee still ached from a shrapnel injury that had ended his military career. His reaction time was probably a half-second slower, but adrenaline was already smoothing away the aches, sharpening his focus. Miles stepped into Isabella's office. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." The intruders spun around. Up close, Miles could see more details. The tall one had a tattoo on his neck, probably gang-related, and his gun was a Glock 19, standard semi-automatic. The shorter one held a knife, not a gun. 8-inch blade, serrated edge, held in a reverse grip suggesting he'd done this before. The fuck? The tall one swung his Glock toward Miles. "Who the hell are you?" "Janitor," Miles said, keeping his voice steady. "Building's closed. You're trespassing." The shorter one laughed, a high-pitched sound that confirmed Miles's suspicion about drugs. "Janitor's gonna stop us? With what? A mop?" "If necessary." Isabella spoke up, her voice strained but controlled. "Miles, don't. Just leave. Call security." "Already did, ma'am. Help's on the way." The tall one's expression darkened. "Then we better work fast." He turned back to Isabella, gun steady. "Access codes to the financial accounts. Now. Don't tell me you don't know them. You're the fucking CEO." "I don't have them memorized," Isabella said.
They're in a secure database. I'd need to log in, verify my identity, then do it. The shorter one grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the computer. You've got 2 minutes before I start cutting things off. Miles saw Isabella flinch, saw the calculation in her eyes, trying to buy time, hoping security would arrive before this escalated. But Miles knew the timeline. Even with emergency priority, SWAT would need at least 8 minutes to reach the 47th floor. Security guards downstairs were unarmed, trained for trespassing complaints and drunk executives, not active shooters. 8 minutes might as well be 8 hours. The tall one kept his gun pointed vaguely in Miles's direction, but his attention was on Isabella and the computer. Amateur mistake. Never split your focus in a hostage situation. Always control the room first. Miles shifted his weight, fingers tightening on the mop handle. I'm serious, old man, the tall one said. Get the fuck out of here before you get hurt. Can't do that. What, you some kind of hero? Miles considered the question. Was he? The military had given him medals. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal. But he'd never felt heroic. Just a man doing his job, trying to bring his team home alive. Sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing spectacularly. The mission that had ended his career played in his mind like a film loop that wouldn't stop. Sand swirling in the headlights, the interpreter screaming a warning, the IED detonating under the second vehicle, fire and smoke, and the sound of his sergeant calling for a medic. They'd lost 3 men that night, 3 men under Miles's command, 3 families getting folded flags at Arlington. After that, he'd put in for discharge. The Army had pushed back, offering promotions, desk assignments, anything to keep a decorated officer on the rolls. But Miles had been done with leadership, done with making decisions that cost lives, done with the weight of responsibility that crushed his chest every night when he tried to sleep. A janitor's job was simple: clean the mess, throw away the trash, make things orderly. No life or death decisions, no responsibility beyond his immediate tasks. But standing in Isabella's office with a gun pointed at his chest and a civilian in danger, Miles realized something. You could change your uniform, but you couldn't change who you were. 3 years of pushing a mop cart hadn't erased the soldier underneath. No, Miles said finally. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who's seen what happens when good people do nothing. The tall one's patience snapped. That's it. I'm done with this shit. He raised the Glock, finger moving to the trigger. Miles moved. The motion was pure muscle memory drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. He pivoted left, minimizing his profile while simultaneously thrusting the mop handle forward like a spear. The end caught the tall one square in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs with an audible whoosh. The gun discharged, a deafening crack in the enclosed office space, but the bullet went wild, shattering the window behind Isabella's desk. Wind and rain immediately roared into the room, papers swirling like snow. Miles didn't stop. He twisted the mop handle, using the tall one's instinctive grab as leverage to yank him off balance. The Glock clattered to the floor. Miles kicked it away and brought his elbow down on the back of the man's neck. Controlled force, enough to stun, but not kill. The tall one collapsed. The shorter one reacted faster than Miles expected, lunging forward with the knife. Miles barely got the mop handle up in time, catching the blade against the aluminum shaft. The knife bit deep, nearly severing the handle, but held. They grappled, strength against strength. The shorter one was younger, amped up on adrenaline or meth or both. Surprisingly strong for his size. He drove forward, trying to bull Miles into the wall, but Miles had 50 pounds on him and decades of training. He let himself be pushed back 2 steps, then dropped his weight and pivoted, using the attacker's momentum against him. The shorter one stumbled, off balance, and Miles brought the mop handle down on his knife hand. Bone cracked. The knife fell. Miles followed up with a sweeping kick to the back of the knee, dropping the shorter one to the ground, then a controlled strike to the temple with the heel of his palm. The attacker went limp. The entire confrontation had lasted maybe 10 seconds. Miles stood over the unconscious intruders, breathing hard, the ruined mop handle still gripped in his right hand. His knee throbbed where he'd pivoted, and his left shoulder, injured in the same IED blast that had killed his men, sent shooting pains down his arm. But he was alive. Isabella,
was alive. Miles! Isabella's voice was shaky, her hands trembling as she steadied herself against the desk. What the hell just happened? Before Miles could answer, the office flooded with light and sound. Security guards bursting through the door, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Behind them came Chicago PD, tactical gear, the controlled chaos of law enforcement responding to an active shooter call. On the ground! Hands where we can see them! Miles dropped the mop handle and raised his hands, slowly sinking to his knees. He knew the protocol. In situations like this, everyone was a threat until proven otherwise. An officer approached, weapon trained on Miles's chest. You! Identify yourself. Miles Carter, maintenance staff. These are the intruders. He nodded toward the unconscious men. The tall one had the firearm. It's near the desk. The shorter one had a knife. Where's the weapon now? Kicked under the bookshelf. The officer kept his gun trained on Miles while others secured the scene, checking the intruders for additional weapons, handcuffing them even though they were unconscious. Standard procedure. Isabella found her voice. Officer, this man saved my life. He's telling the truth. Those two broke in and held me at gunpoint. Miles, Mr. Carter, he stopped them. The officer's posture relaxed slightly, but he didn't lower his weapon. We'll need full statements from both of you. EMTs are on the way to check out the suspects and make sure there are no other injuries. He finally holstered his gun, studying Miles with new interest. Sir, you former military? Yes. What branch? Army, Special Forces. The officer nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. That explains some things. Captain, I'm guessing? Was. More personnel flooded the office. Detectives, crime scene techs, the building's security director looking pale and apologetic. Isabella was ushered to a separate room for her statement. Miles was taken to a conference room where a detective named Sarah Martinez sat across from him with a digital recorder and a notepad. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice professional but not unkind. I need you to walk me through everything that happened tonight, start to finish. Take your time. Miles did, recounting the evening from when he'd noticed the elevator arrival to the moment police entered the office. He left nothing out. The fight, his military background, his assessment of the situation. Detective Martinez took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly letting him talk. When he finished, she set down her pen. That's quite a story. It's what happened. I believe you. Ms. Grant's account matches yours almost word for word. Plus, we've got building security footage showing these two clowns entering through the loading dock, bypassing the security scanners with stolen access cards. She paused. This wasn't random, Mr. Carter. They came here specifically for Ms. Grant and her access codes. I figured. Any idea why? Miles shook his head. I'm a janitor, detective. I empty trash and mop floors. Corporate espionage isn't my area. Martinez smiled slightly. Somehow I doubt that. Your area, I mean. Captain Miles Carter, 3 tours in Afghanistan, decorated for valor multiple times, leader of an SF team that conducted high-risk operations across Helmand Province. She saw his expression. Yeah, we ran your name. That's quite a resume to leave behind for a janitor position. I wanted peace and quiet. And how's that working out? Despite everything, Miles almost laughed. Not great tonight. Martinez closed her notebook. We'll need you to stay available over the next few days for follow-up questions. But between us, you did good work here. A lot of people wouldn't have intervened. Even fewer could have pulled off what you did without anyone dying. Just training. No, Martinez said firmly. It's more than that. Training tells you how to fight. It doesn't tell you when to fight or why to fight. You chose to put yourself in danger to protect someone else. That's character, not training. Miles didn't respond. He'd heard similar things after combat actions, officers and commanders telling him he'd shown bravery or valor or leadership. But Miles remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the split-second decisions that could have gone wrong in a dozen different ways. He'd gotten lucky, that's all. Lucky that his training had held, that the intruders had been amateurs, that his body had responded despite being 12 years older and 20 pounds heavier than during his prime. Martinez stood. You're free to go. EMTs want to check you out first. Standard procedure after an altercation. Then you can head home. Get some rest.
But rest felt impossible. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a familiar exhaustion that went bone deep. Miles had experienced it after firefights, that strange, hollow feeling that came when your body realized it was still alive and didn't quite know how to process that information. The EMTs cleared him. Minor contusions, elevated blood pressure that would normalize, nothing requiring hospital attention. By the time they finished, it was nearly 10 o'clock p.m. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glittering under streetlights. Miles found his cart exactly where he'd left it, the broken mop handle lying beside it like evidence of something that hadn't really happened. Except it had. The shattered window on the 47th floor, the police tape, the crime scene text still processing Isabella's office. All proof that his quiet life had just gotten a lot more complicated. He was gathering his cleaning supplies when Isabella appeared in the corridor. She'd changed from her business suit into jeans and a sweater someone must have brought her, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Without the CEO armor, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Miles," she said, "I wanted to thank you properly, not in front of all those police and investigators, just person to person." "You already thanked me." "No, I expressed gratitude in a moment of crisis. That's different." She moved closer, and Miles could see she'd been crying, eyes red-rimmed, mascara smudged. "What you did tonight, you could have been killed. You should have been killed. That man had a gun, and you had a mop." "Couldn't let him hurt you." "Why?" The question came out fierce, almost angry. "You don't know me. We've exchanged maybe 20 words in 6 months. Most people in your position would have hidden, called for help, kept themselves safe. Why risk everything?" Miles considered his answer carefully. "Because letting someone get hurt when you can stop it, that's not really living. That's just existing. And I've been existing for 3 years. Maybe it was time to actually live again." Isabella's eyes glistened with fresh tears. "Well, you saved my life. However you want to frame it, whatever your reasons were, you saved me. So thank you. Truly, deeply, thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, two people brought together by violence and circumstance, unsure what came next. Finally, Isabella said, "The police think this was an inside job. Someone gave those men my schedule, my office location, details about building security. They're investigating everyone with access to that information, which is probably half the executive team, at least, and several assistants, security personnel, IT staff." She rubbed her temples, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. "Someone I work with every day, someone I trust, tried to have me robbed or kidnapped or killed. I don't even know which yet." Miles understood that betrayal. In Afghanistan, he'd worked with local interpreters and guides, men who became brothers, who saved his team's lives on multiple occasions. Then one of them had fed information to the Taliban, leading to an ambush that nearly wiped out his unit. Trust, once broken, left wounds that never fully healed. "You'll get through it," he said. "You're stronger than you think." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because you didn't fall apart tonight. You stayed calm, tried to buy time, kept thinking even with a gun pointed at you. That's not panic, that's leadership under fire." Isabella looked at him with something approaching wonder. "Were you an officer in the military?" "Captain. Special Forces." "Yes." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "And now you're cleaning floors at Preston Tower. Everyone needs a second act." "Is that what tonight was? Your second act?" Miles picked up the broken mop handle, turning it over in his hands. In the hallway lighting, the aluminum shaft looked almost silver, noble somehow despite its mundane purpose. "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow when the adrenaline wears off." Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all evening. "Will you be here tomorrow? Or are you taking emergency leave after your workplace incident?" "I'll be here. Someone's got to clean up the mess on the 47th floor." "About that," Isabella hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I suspect the board will want to meet with you. What you did tonight, it's going to raise questions about building security, our vetting processes, all sorts of corporate liability issues. You prepared for that kind of attention?" "Not particularly. I'll try to run interference where I can. But Miles, you're about to become famous whether you want to or not. Former Special Forces operative working as janitor saves CEO with mop? That's front page material. Miles felt his stomach drop. Fame was the last thing he wanted. He'd left the military specifically to disappear, to become nobody, to avoid the attention that came with combat decorations and heroic narratives. The Army had wanted to make him a recruiter, parading him around high schools and colleges, using his story to sign up teenagers who didn't understand what they were agreeing to. He'd refused and accepted discharge instead. "I need to finish my shift," Miles said, turning back to his cart. "Miles." Isabella's voice stopped him. "Whatever happens next, whatever gets written or said or speculated about, I want you to know something. You're a good man, and that's rare." She walked away before he could respond, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Miles stood alone with his cleaning cart, looking at the broken mop handle in his hands. For 3 years, he'd pushed this cart through Preston Tower, invisible and unremarked, content to exist in the margins of other people's lives. But tonight, visibility had found him whether he wanted it or not. He thought about Detective Martinez's words. Training tells you how to fight. It doesn't tell you when to fight or why to fight. Maybe that was the real question, not whether he could still fight. Tonight had answered that emphatically. The question was whether he should, whether stepping back into the spotlight, accepting the responsibility and attention that came with being a hero, was worth abandoning the quiet anonymity he'd worked so hard to achieve. Miles didn't have an answer yet, but as he gathered his supplies and prepared to actually clean the chaos on the 47th floor, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: purpose. Not just the satisfaction of completing tasks, but the deeper sense that what he did mattered, that his choices had consequences beyond swept floors and emptied trash bins. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was perhaps exactly what he'd been avoiding since leaving Afghanistan. The night stretched ahead, full of police reports and insurance claims and the practical work of restoring order after violence. Miles Carter, former Special Forces captain turned janitor, picked up his cart and headed back toward the elevator, ready to face whatever came next. Behind him, through the windows of Isabella's office, the city sparkled in the post-storm darkness. Millions of lights, millions of stories, millions of people just trying to survive another day. Miles had been one of them, content to remain anonymous, just another light in an endless constellation. But tonight, for better or worse, he'd stepped out of the shadows, and there was no going back. The morning after felt like waking into someone else's life. Miles arrived at Preston Tower at his usual time, 6 o'clock a.m., before the day shift started, when the building belonged to him and the overnight security guard who nodded without really seeing him. Except today, the guard actually looked up from his monitor. "Carter," he said, voice carrying a mix of respect and curiosity that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. "Heard what you did. That's some serious action, man." Miles signed the logbook, keeping his expression neutral. "Just did what needed doing." "Yeah, well, most people wouldn't have. Building's been buzzing since midnight. News vans showed up around 3. Corporate sent out some bullshit press release about an incident, and security's been doubled. You're going to have company today." Miles had suspected as much. The question was how much company and how intrusive they'd be. He took the service elevator to the 47th floor, half expecting police tape or investigators, but the corridor was empty except for a professional cleaning crew already at work in Isabella's office. They'd replaced the shattered window with a temporary board, removed the blood-stained carpet, and were scrubbing down surfaces with the methodical efficiency of people who cleaned up after violence for a living. His own cleaning cart sat where he'd left it, the broken mop handle placed carefully on top like a museum piece. Miles picked it up, studying the deep gouge where the knife had bitten into the aluminum. Another few inches and the blade would have found his ribs instead of the handle. Close. Too close. He threw the broken handle in the industrial trash compactor and retrieved a new one from the supply closet, going through the familiar motions of assembling his equipment: bucket, mop, disinfectant, microfiber cloths, trash bags. Simple tools for simple work. Except nothing felt simple anymore. By 7:30, the early arrivals started trickling in. Ambitious assistants, West Coast executives on conference calls, the handful of people who believed showing up before everyone else demonstrated dedication rather than poor work-life balance. Miles kept his head down,
moving through his rounds on the lower floors where yesterday's drama hadn't reached yet. But people had heard. Of course they had. In a building with 1,100 employees, gossip moved faster than the elevators. "That's him," Miles heard someone whisper near the 23rd floor break room. "The janitor who took down those guys. I heard he was special forces. I heard he killed them with his bare hands." "No, it was the mop. He literally used a mop." Miles kept walking, but the whispers followed.
By 8:30, when the bulk of the workforce arrived, he'd become a curiosity. People glancing at him as he passed, some offering tentative smiles or nods, others simply staring like he was an exhibit in a zoo. The invisible man had become hypervisible overnight, and the attention scraped against his nerves like sandpaper. He was dumping trash in the 32nd floor corridor when Tyler Vance appeared, the same junior executive who'd mocked him yesterday. Tyler looked different now. Younger somehow, uncertain, his usual swagger replaced by something approaching humility. "Hey, Miles?" Tyler stopped a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Miles set down the trash bag. "You're talking." "Yeah, Look, about yesterday. The things I said, the way I acted, that was out of line. Way out of line." Tyler wouldn't meet his eyes, addressing the floor instead. "I didn't know about your background or anything, but that's not an excuse. I was being a dick just to be a dick, and I'm sorry." Miles studied the younger man, recognizing the discomfort of someone forced to confront their own behavior. Tyler wasn't apologizing because he'd suddenly discovered empathy. He was apologizing because Miles had become someone who mattered, someone with a story that made Tyler's mockery look petty and cruel in retrospect. But an apology was an apology, even if the motivations were mixed. "Apology accepted," Miles said simply. Tyler finally looked up, relief evident on his face. "Really? Just like that? What do you want, a negotiation? You apologized, I accepted. We're done. After what you did last night, saving Ms. Grant, fighting off armed guys. Man, you could probably get me fired if you wanted. Hell, you could probably have my job." Miles almost laughed at that. The idea of sitting in a cubicle, attending meetings about synergizing deliverables, or whatever corporate speak passed for actual work, sounded worse than combat. "I don't want your job, Tyler, and I don't want you fired. Just maybe think before you talk next time. Not everyone who works here is trying to climb your ladder." Tyler nodded slowly, processing this. "Can I ask you something? Why do you work here? With your military background, you could be doing security consulting or private contracting or something that pays way more than pushing a mop," Miles finished. "Because I wanted simple, quiet, no stakes higher than whether the floors are clean." "But you gave that up last night." "I gave that up when two men threatened someone with a gun. Simple went out the window. Literally." Miles picked up his trash bag. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got 12 more floors to cover before lunch." He left Tyler standing in the corridor, probably trying to reconcile the janitor who'd saved the CEO with the janitor who still insisted on finishing his rounds. Miles understood the confusion. Most people assumed that doing something heroic automatically transformed you, elevated you to a different status. They didn't understand that heroism was often just competence meeting crisis, training meeting necessity. The transformation didn't happen to you. It happened around you and how others saw and treated you afterward. By 10 o'clock, Miles had been approached by 7 different employees wanting to thank him, ask questions, or simply acknowledge what he'd done. Each interaction chipped away at his anonymity, forcing him into conversations he didn't want about experiences he'd tried to leave behind. He was considering hiding in the sub-basement maintenance area when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Miles, it's Isabella Grant. Could you come to my temporary office on 45? Need to discuss something. IG." Miles stared at the message, noting she'd signed with her initials like they were colleagues rather than CEO and janitor. The temporary office detail was interesting too. She wasn't using her regular space yet, probably couldn't stomach returning to where she'd been held at gunpoint 12 hours earlier. He found her on the 45th floor in a windowless conference room that had been converted into a makeshift office. Isabella sat behind a borrowed desk covered in file folders and her laptop, wearing a navy suit and pearl earrings that probably cost more than Miles's monthly salary. But her eyes were tired, shadowed by a sleepless night, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured for him to sit. "Close the door, please," she said. Miles did, taking the chair across from her. The room smelled like coffee and stress, the peculiar scent of corporate crisis management. Isabella pushed a folder across the desk. "That's yours. Employment records, background checks, everything HR pulled last night and this morning. Some board members are questioning why we had a former Special Forces captain working as a janitor. They're concerned about liability, vetting procedures, all the usual corporate paranoia." "Am I fired?" "What?" "No." Isabella looked genuinely shocked. "Miles, you saved my life. The board can question whatever they want, but you're not being fired. If anything, they want to promote you." That sounded worse than being fired. "I don't want a promotion." "I told them you'd say that." Isabella leaned back, studying him with those analytical eyes that saw too much. "But we need to talk about what happens next." The police arrested both attackers this morning after they woke up at the hospital. The tall one, Marcus Webb, has a record for armed robbery and assault. The shorter one is his cousin, Darius Webb, currently on parole for drug charges. Inside job? Looks that way. Detective Martinez thinks someone at Preston Holdings hired them, gave them my schedule and building access codes. The investigation is going to tear through this company like a hurricane, Miles. Every executive, every assistant, every person with security clearance will be questioned. Miles watched her carefully. "You have suspicions." It wasn't a question, and Isabella didn't pretend otherwise. 3 people had all the information the Webbs needed. My CFO, Robert Chen, my executive assistant, Linda Marsh, and the head of IT security, David Kowalski. All 3 have worked here for years. All 3 are cleared and vetted, and all 3 had opportunity. Motive? That's where it gets complicated. Isabella opened her laptop, turning it so Miles could see a spreadsheet filled with financial data. "I've been investigating some irregularities in our accounts over the past 2 months. Nothing huge, but consistent. Payments to shell companies, consulting fees that don't match actual services rendered, expense reports that seem inflated. Someone's embezzling. Someone's stealing approximately $40,000 per month through various channels. I was getting close to identifying who, when this happened." She closed the laptop. "I think they hired the Webbs to either scare me off the investigation or get my access codes so they could cover their tracks." Miles processed this information, his mind shifting into tactical assessment mode. If they're desperate enough to hire criminals, they're desperate enough to try again. "You have protection?" "The board hired a security detail, 2 bodyguards, former law enforcement, following me everywhere." Isabella's expression suggested she wasn't thrilled about this. "They're waiting outside right now, probably listening to every word." "Good. Keep them close." "Miles, I didn't ask you here to talk about security." Isabella folded her hands on the desk, her corporate composure cracking slightly. "I asked because I need your help. I'm a janitor. You're a decorated military officer with combat experience and tactical training. You assessed a dangerous situation last night and resolved it without anyone dying. That's not luck. That's expertise. That's also not my job anymore." "Then what is your job?" Isabella's voice sharpened with frustration. "Mopping floors? Emptying trash? Miles, you have skills that could help catch whoever's behind this. Skills that are wasted on maintenance work." The words hit harder than she probably intended. Wasted. As if the last 3 years of his life had been meaningless, a prolonged sabbatical from his true purpose. Miles felt anger kindle in his chest, the rare emotion that occasionally broke through his carefully maintained calm. "You think I'm wasted?" he said quietly. "You think the work I do doesn't matter?" Isabella realized her mistake immediately. "No, that's not what I meant. Every person in this building walks on floors I cleaned, sits at desks I sanitized, uses bathrooms I maintain. The CEO you saved yesterday exists because the janitor noticed something wrong and did something about it." Miles stood, his voice still controlled but carrying an edge. "My job isn't wasted, Ms. Grant. It's just not glamorous enough for people like you to notice." He turned toward the door. "Wait." Isabella's voice stopped him, softer now, almost pleading. "You're right. I'm sorry. That was condescending and wrong,
and I apologize.
Miles kept his hand on the doorknob but didn't open it. Isabella continued, words spilling out in a rush. I spent 12 hours last night thinking about what happened. About how you put yourself in danger for someone you barely know. About how most people would have hidden or run or let someone else handle it. And I kept asking myself why. Why would someone with your background, your capabilities, choose to be invisible? Because invisible is safe. Safe from what? Miles turned back, meeting her eyes. From responsibility, from command, from making decisions that get people killed. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way Miles hadn't intended. But Isabella didn't look away, didn't retreat into corporate platitudes or uncomfortable silence. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. Afghanistan? She asked gently. A lot of places. But yeah, Afghanistan is where it ended. I'm not going to ask for details. That's yours, not mine. Isabella stood, moving around the desk to stand closer. But Miles, I need you to understand something. What you did last night wasn't about your past. It was about who you are right now today. You saw someone in danger, and you helped. That's not military training, that's character. Detective Martinez said something similar. Then maybe you should listen. Isabella pulled a business card from her pocket, pressing it into Miles's hand. This is my personal number, not the office line, not my assistant, direct line to me. I'm asking you to stay aware, stay alert. The person who hired those men is still out there, still desperate, probably even more dangerous now that their plan failed. Miles looked at the card, feeling the weight of what she was asking. Not a job exactly, but vigilance. The same hyper-awareness that had kept him alive in combat zones, applied to fluorescent-lit corridors and executive offices. I can't be your bodyguard, he said.
I don't have training for close protection, and honestly, this building has 1,100 people in it. I can't watch everyone. I'm not asking you to watch everyone. I'm asking you to trust your instincts. You noticed those men last night when no one else did. You saw a threat and responded. That's the kind of awareness we need right now. Miles pocketed the card, though he wasn't sure he'd ever use it. I'll keep my eyes open, but Ms. Grant, Isabella, after what we went through, I think we can use first names. Isabella, Miles corrected, the name feeling strange in his mouth. After what we went through, you should know something. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who couldn't live with himself if he'd done nothing. Maybe that's what heroes are, Isabella said softly. People who can't live with themselves if they do nothing. Before Miles could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. The door opened without waiting for permission, and a man in his 60s strode in. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of presence that expected deference as a natural right. Miles recognized him from company photos in the lobby. Richard Preston himself, majority shareholder and chairman of the board. Ms. Grant, Preston said, his voice carrying the clipped authority of old money. And this must be our mysterious janitor. Isabella straightened, her corporate mask sliding back into place. Mr. Preston, this is Miles Carter. Miles, Richard Preston. Preston extended his hand and Miles shook it, noting the firm grip and evaluating gaze. This was a man accustomed to measuring people quickly and accurately, sorting them into categories of useful or useless within seconds. Mr. Carter, Preston said, I've been reading your file. Impressive service record. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, 3 combat tours. Makes one wonder why you're working in maintenance. Everyone needs a second act, sir. Preston's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. Indeed, well, your second act saved one of my most valuable executives last night. For that, you have my gratitude and the gratitude of this entire organization. Just doing what needed doing. That kind of false modesty won't serve you here, son. You did something extraordinary, and Preston Holdings rewards extraordinary action. Preston pulled an envelope from his jacket. Inside is a check for $50,000. Bonus for exceptional service. Plus, I'm offering you a position in corporate security. Salary of $90,000 annually, benefits, the works. Miles stared at the envelope without taking it. $50,000. More money than he'd seen in 3 years of janitorial work. Life-changing money for someone living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment. And he wanted no part of it. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Preston,
But I'm not interested in corporate security.
Preston's expression froze. In his world, people didn't refuse his offers. Excuse me? I said no thank you, sir.
Young man, do you understand what I'm offering? This is a career opportunity. Most people aren't me, Miles interrupted, his voice respectful but firm. I'm grateful for the bonus. I won't refuse that. But the job, that's not for me. Preston turned to Isabella as if she might explain this bizarre rejection. Ms. Grant, perhaps you could clarify the situation for Mr. Carter. Help him understand the gravity of what he's turning down. Isabella met Miles's eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the recognition of someone who'd made their position clear and wouldn't be moved. She turned back to Preston. Sir, I think Miles understands perfectly. He's choosing to remain in his current position. We should respect that choice. Preston's face reddened. This is absurd. The man's obviously overqualified for janitorial work, and you're suggesting we just let him continue? I'm suggesting we let him make his own decisions about his career, Isabella said calmly. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Miles watched Preston struggle with the unfamiliar experience of having his generosity refused, his authority questioned by both the janitor and the CEO he'd hired to fix the company. Finally, Preston exhaled sharply. Fine. Mr. Carter remains in maintenance if that's what he wants, but the bonus stands. Consider it hazard pay for last night's events. He thrust the envelope at Miles. And if you change your mind about the position, my door is open. Thank you, sir. Preston turned to Isabella. We need to discuss security protocols in the investigation. My office, 30 minutes. He left without waiting for confirmation, his exit managing to convey disappointment and authority in equal measure.
When the door closed, Isabella let out a breath she'd been holding. You just turned down $90,000. Plus the hassle of wearing a suit and attending meetings. Yeah, I did. Miles. Isabella shook her head, somewhere between admiration and exasperation. Most people would kill for that opportunity. I'm not most people. Miles opened the envelope, glancing at the check inside. $50,000, signed by Richard Preston himself. It was surreal, this piece of paper representing more than a year of his current salary. This I'll take. It'll help. Help with what? Miles thought about his studio apartment with the broken heating system, the medical bills from his army injuries that he paid off slowly each month, the community center where he volunteered teaching self-defense to at-risk kids. $50,000 wouldn't solve everything, but it would ease pressures he'd gotten used to carrying. Just life, he said. General life things. Isabella studied him quietly. You're the most unusual person I've met in a long time. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. She glanced at her watch. I need to prepare for Preston. But Miles, remember what I said. Keep your eyes open. Whoever hired those men is still out there, and they're probably more dangerous now than before. Miles nodded and left. Walking back through corridors that felt different now, charged with potential threat instead of benign emptiness. He noticed things he'd previously overlooked. The security camera blind spots, the emergency exit doors that could be propped open, the elevator maintenance schedules posted by the call buttons. His military training, dormant for 3 years, was waking up whether he wanted it to or not. He spent the next 4 hours working his regular route, but his mind wasn't on the cleaning. It was cataloging faces, noting unusual behavior, identifying people who seemed nervous or distracted. The executive who kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. The assistant who jumped when Miles rounded a corner. The IT technician who avoided eye contact. Paranoia or vigilance? Miles wasn't sure anymore. By 2 o'clock, he was on the 43rd floor when he heard raised voices from a corner office. The door was partially open, and Miles recognized one voice immediately. Robert Chen, the CFO Isabella had mentioned as a suspect. I don't care what the board thinks, Chen was saying, his usual calm replaced by agitation. We can't just open every account for investigation. There are privacy concerns, legal ramifications. There's been an attempted robbery, another voice countered. David Kowalski, head of IT security. The police have warrants. Legal ramifications don't mean shit when we're talking about criminal conspiracy. You think I don't know that? But tearing apart every financial record we have, exposing confidential client information, potentially tanking our stock price because some junkie criminals tried to shake down the CEO? They weren't junkies, they were hired. Someone gave them access codes, building schematics, Isabella's schedule. This was an inside job, Robert. A pause. Then Chen, quieter. Are you suggesting I had something to do with this? I'm suggesting everyone's a suspect until proven otherwise, including you, including me. Miles had stopped pretending to work, standing just outside the doorframe listening. He knew he should move on, that this was a private conversation he had no business overhearing. But his instincts were screaming that something was off. This is ridiculous, Chen said. I've worked for Preston Holdings for 14 years. I helped build this division from the ground up.
And now I'm being treated like a common criminal because two thugs tried to rob the new CEO? If you've got nothing to hide, the investigation won't touch you. That's naive, David, and you know it. Investigations like this destroy careers regardless of guilt. The mere suspicion is enough to tank someone's reputation. More silence. Then Kowalski, his voice carrying a warning. You sound scared, Robert. I sound realistic. There's a difference. Miles heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly moved down the corridor, pushing his cart as if he'd been working there all along. David Kowalski emerged first. Mid-40s, thick glasses, the slightly hunched posture of someone who spent too much time at computers. He glanced at Miles without recognition and headed for the elevators. Robert Chen appeared moments later, and unlike Kowalski, he noticed Miles immediately. Chen was younger than Miles expected, late 30s, Asian American, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost $5,000. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were calculating, measuring. You're the janitor, Chen said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. The one who stopped the robbery. I interrupted it, yes. Chen moved closer and Miles noted the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. This was a man under extreme stress, functioning on caffeine and adrenaline. Can I ask you something? Chen kept his voice low. When you fought those men last night, did they say anything, mention any names, any instructions they'd received? Miles considered the question carefully. They wanted access codes, that's all they talked about. Nothing else? No indication of who sent them? Just two criminals trying to steal company secrets. Why? Chen smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Professional curiosity. This kind of breach affects all of us in management. We want to understand how it happened so we can prevent it in the future. It was a reasonable answer, the kind of corporate speak Miles had heard countless times. But something in Chen's delivery felt rehearsed, as if he'd practiced this conversation before having it. I'm sure the police investigation will figure it out, Miles said neutrally. I'm sure they will. Chen glanced at his watch, a Rolex, Miles noted. Well, thank you for what you did. You saved not just Ms. Grant, but potentially this entire company. He walked away, leaving Miles with the distinct impression he'd just been evaluated as either a threat or an asset. The question was which category he'd fallen into. Miles continued his rounds, but Chen's questions nagged at him. Why would the CFO care about what the attackers had said? Why approach a janitor instead of asking the police or Isabella directly? Unless Chen was trying to determine how much Miles knew, how much he'd overheard or observed. The thought sent a chill down Miles's spine. He was pulling trash from a conference room on the 38th floor when his phone buzzed. Isabella's personal number. Miles, where are you? Her voice was tight with controlled panic. 38th floor. What's wrong? I just got a text from an unknown number. Anonymous. It said, the janitor got lucky. You won't. Miles, they're threatening you now. Miles felt his tactical awareness spike, every sense sharpening. You showed this to security? They're tracing it now, but these things are usually burner phones. Untraceable. Isabella took a shaky breath. Miles, maybe you should go home. Take a few days off. Let the police handle this. Running doesn't help. Neither does being a target. Miles looked around the conference room. Windows overlooking the city, single exit point, his cart blocking the doorway. If someone wanted to come after him, this would be a terrible place to be caught. But fear was useless. He'd learned that in combat. Fear clouded judgment, slowed reactions, got people killed. "I'm staying," he said quietly, "but I'll be careful." Miles, Isabella, whoever sent that text wanted to scare us, both of us. They're showing they're still in control, still a threat. If I run, if I hide, they win. And if they kill you, then they'll have to explain why a janitor was important enough to murder. He heard her exhale, frustration and worry mixing in her voice. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most stubborn." "Probably both." Miles pushed his cart toward the elevator. "I'm finishing my shift, but I'll check in every hour. If I miss a check-in, call the police." "This is insane. Welcome to my world." He ended the call and rode the elevator down, hyper-aware of his surroundings in a way he hadn't been since Afghanistan. Every person who got on was evaluated. Hands visible, posture aggressive or passive, eye contact or avoidance. His body remembered this state, the heightened alertness that turned everything into potential threat or potential ally. By 6 o'clock, when his shift officially ended, Miles had checked in with Isabella 3 times and noticed approximately a dozen things that might or might not be suspicious. The executive who'd taken the same elevator 4 times in 1 hour, the maintenance worker he didn't recognize accessing the IT server room, the security guard who seemed unusually interested in Miles's route through the building, paranoia or vigilance. The line between them was thinner than most people realized. Miles was signing out at the security desk when Detective Martinez arrived, striding through the lobby with purposeful energy. She spotted him immediately. "Mr. Carter, glad I caught you. Got a minute?" "Sure." They moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the evening rush of employees heading home. Martinez pulled out her phone, showing him a photo of a middle-aged woman with brown hair and nervous eyes. "Recognize her?" Miles studied the image. "Linda Marsh, Ms. Grant's executive assistant." "That's right. We brought her in for questioning this afternoon. She lawyered up immediately, which is her right, but it raises questions." Martinez pocketed her phone. "We pulled her financial records. Ms. Marsh has been making regular deposits to a savings account, $5,000 per month for the past 8 months. Her salary doesn't support that kind of savings rate." "You think she's the embezzler?" "I think she's involved somehow, either taking money directly or facilitating someone else's theft." Martinez studied him carefully. "Ms. Grant mentioned you overheard a conversation between Robert Chen and David Kowalski this afternoon." So Isabella was keeping Martinez informed. Smart. "I was cleaning nearby, couldn't help overhearing." "What was your impression of that conversation?" Miles chose his words carefully. Chen seemed defensive, worried about the investigation. Kowalski seemed suspicious of everyone, including Chen. Did Chen's worry seem like normal concern or guilty knowledge? "I'm a janitor, detective, not a profiler." Martinez smiled slightly. "You're also a former Special Forces captain with years of experience reading hostile environments and potentially dangerous individuals. So I'll ask again, guilty knowledge or reasonable concern?" Miles replayed the conversation in his mind, Chen's tone and body language, the specific questions he'd asked later. "Guilty knowledge," he admitted. "But of what, I can't say. Could be the embezzlement. Could be something else." "That matches my instinct." Martinez checked her watch. "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you're already involved whether you want to be. We're executing search warrants tomorrow morning, Chen's office, Kowalski's office, Linda Marsh's desk. We're also pulling all internal communications from the past year. If someone at Preston Holdings hired those men, we'll find the connection. And in the meantime, watch your back. That text Ms. Grant received wasn't an idle threat. Someone views you as a problem that needs solving." Martinez handed him a business card. "My direct line. You notice anything strange, anything that feels off, you call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." Miles took the card, adding it to the growing collection in his wallet. Define strange. "You'll know it when you see it. Trust your instincts. They kept you alive in Afghanistan. They'll keep you alive here." After Martinez left, Miles stood in the lobby watching the evening crowd stream past. Executives in designer suits, assistants in practical heels, IT workers with backpacks and headphones. Hundreds of people, any one of whom could be a threat or a victim or simply someone trying to survive another day. He thought about going home, about the $50,000 check folded in his pocket, about Isabella's offer to use her personal number if he needed anything. His life had gone from anonymous to complicated in less than 24 hours, and the momentum showed no signs of slowing. But as Miles pushed through the lobby doors into the cool October evening, he realized something. He felt more alive than he had in 3 years. The adrenaline, the purpose, the stakes that mattered beyond clean floors and empty trash bins, all of it reminded him of who he used to be before he'd tried to bury that person beneath gray uniforms and quiet shifts. Maybe you couldn't outrun your past. Maybe it always caught up eventually, wearing different faces but carrying the same essential truth. Some people were built for the fight, and pretending otherwise just delayed the inevitable. Miles Carter walked toward the L train, invisible again in the evening crowds, but feeling the weight of what came next settling on his shoulders like an old, familiar coat. The fight wasn't over. It had barely begun. The search warrants hit Preston Tower like a controlled detonation at 7:00 a.m. Friday morning. Miles arrived to find the lobby crawling with federal agents wearing FBI windbreakers, boxes of documents being wheeled out on hand trucks, and employees gathering in confused clusters near the elevators. The atmosphere crackled with nervous energy, whispered speculation spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Miles kept his head down, moving toward the service elevator, but a hand caught his arm. He turned to find Isabella, flanked by her 2 bodyguards, thick-necked men in dark suits who scanned the lobby with professional paranoia. "They're executing warrants on 3 offices," Isabella said quietly, her voice tight. "Chen, Kowalski, and Linda Marsh. The FBI is involved now because they think this crosses state lines. Money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "Kidnapping?" "The Webb brothers confessed last night, said they were hired to grab me, take me to a secondary location, force me to transfer funds from company accounts. They claimed they were supposed to get $25,000 each for the job." Isabella's composure was holding, but barely. Miles could see the tremor in her hands, the exhaustion shadowing her eyes. "This wasn't about scaring me off an investigation. This was about stealing millions." Miles processed this, his tactical mind running scenarios. Who hired them? They claimed they never met the person directly. Everything was arranged through encrypted messages and dead drops for payment. Untraceable. Isabella glanced toward the elevators where FBI agents were boarding with evidence boxes. "But the money trail doesn't lie. If someone at Preston Holdings was funneling cash to the Webbs, the FBI will find it." One of her bodyguards stepped closer, murmuring something about getting her to a secure location. Isabella nodded, then turned back to Miles. "I have back-to-back meetings with lawyers and board members all day, but Miles..." She hesitated, weighing her words. "Be careful today. Whoever's behind this is going to be desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also make dangerous decisions. I'll keep my eyes open. Do more than that. Stay in public areas. Don't go anywhere alone. And if something feels wrong, I'll call Detective Martinez. I know the drill." Isabella searched his face, looking for reassurance she couldn't quite find. "I keep thinking about that text. The janitor got lucky. That's not just a threat, Miles. That's a promise." Before he could respond, her bodyguards were ushering her toward the executive elevators, creating a protective bubble that moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Miles watched her go, noting the way people parted for the entourage, how the FBI agents tracked her movement, how everyone in the lobby was suddenly aware that their CEO had become a target and a witness. Miles took the service elevator to his usual starting point on the 47th floor. The executive level felt different this morning. Agents moving through offices with methodical precision, cameras flashing as they documented evidence, the soft click of laptop keys as digital forensic specialists copied hard drives. Yellow police tape cordoned off Chen's office, Kowalski's workspace, and Linda Marsh's cubicle. He started his cleaning routine on the opposite end of the floor, staying out of the way but watching everything. His military training had taught him that intelligence often came from observation rather than interrogation, that people revealed truths through their behavior when they didn't realize anyone was paying attention. The agents worked quickly, professionally, barely acknowledging Miles as he emptied trash bins and wiped down surfaces. But he noticed things they might not have. The way Chen's office had been left immaculately organized, as if someone had cleaned it recently or removed potentially incriminating materials. The scratches around Kowalski's desk locks suggesting they'd been picked or forced. The framed photo on Linda Marsh's desk, her with 2 teenage children, smiling at a school graduation. People with families made different calculations when faced with criminal charges. Fear for themselves was one thing. Fear for their children was something else entirely. Miles was working near the main conference room when raised voices echoed down the corridor. He recognized Robert Chen's tone immediately, sharp with anger and barely controlled panic. "This is harassment. You have no right to—" "We have every right, Mr. Chen," a woman's voice, calm and professional. "The warrants are valid and comprehensive. You can either cooperate or obstruct justice. Your choice." Miles edged closer, positioning himself near a trash receptacle that gave him a clear view into the conference room. Chen stood facing 3 FBI agents, his expensive suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, the polished executive facade cracking under pressure. Behind him sat 2 lawyers in dark suits, taking furious notes on legal pads. The lead agent was a black woman in her 40s, her FBI windbreaker unzipped to reveal a holstered service weapon. Her name tag read Special Agent Deshawn. She held a tablet displaying what looked like financial records, turning it so Chen could see the screen. "These are wire transfers from Preston Holdings accounts to a shell company in the Cayman Islands," Deshawn said. $400,000 over 8 months. The shell company then made cash withdrawals and distributions that we're still tracing. Care to explain your signature on these authorization forms? Chen's face went pale. I sign dozens of authorization forms every week. I can't be expected to remember every transaction. These weren't dozens of forms. These were 4 specific transfers, each for $100,000, each requiring executive-level approval. Your approval, Mr. Chen. One of the lawyers leaned forward. "My client has answered your questions. Unless you're charging him with a crime, this interview is over." Deshawn smiled without warmth. "Mr. Chen, you're not under arrest, yet, but I strongly suggest you think very carefully about your next moves. Whoever orchestrated this scheme is going down. The only question is whether you're the architect or just a useful idiot who signed forms without reading them." "I want to see Ms. Grant," Chen said suddenly. "I need to speak with Isabella." "Ms. Grant is unavailable, and even if she weren't, she's not going to help you out of this mess." Deshawn closed her tablet. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Chen. Don't leave the Chicago area." The agents filed out, passing within feet of Miles without acknowledging his presence. Chen collapsed into a chair, head in his hands, while his lawyers conferred in urgent whispers. Miles watched this tableau for a moment longer, seeing not guilt necessarily, but the crushing weight of someone realizing they'd been set up, or used, or both. Miles continued his rounds, processing what he'd witnessed. If Chen had signed those authorization forms, he was either complicit or criminally negligent. But the desperation in his voice when he'd asked to see Isabella suggested he believed himself innocent, or at least wanted others to believe it. The complexity was giving Miles a headache. Military operations had clear objectives and defined enemies. Corporate crime was all shadows and implications, motives buried under layers of financial transactions and plausible deniability. He was dumping trash in a recycling bin when David Kowalski appeared beside him, moving with the nervous energy of someone running on too much coffee and too little sleep. "You're Carter, right? The janitor who stopped the robbery?" Miles straightened, noting Kowalski's bloodshot eyes and wrinkled shirt. "That's right. I need to tell you something." Kowalski glanced around nervously, ensuring they were alone. "The FBI's been all over my systems this morning, pulling logs and emails. They think I gave those criminals access to the building's security protocols." "Did you?" "No, Jesus Christ, no. But someone used my credentials to disable cameras on the 47th floor the night of the attack. My login, my administrative codes." Kowalski ran a hand through his hair. "I've been trying to tell them my system was compromised weeks ago, that someone's been spoofing my credentials, but they think I'm just covering my ass." Miles studied the IT director carefully. "Were your credentials compromised?" "I don't know how else to explain it. Someone with sophisticated access would need to bypass 3 layers of authentication and know exactly which logs to scrub. That's not amateur hour. That's someone with inside knowledge of our systems. Someone like you. Kowalski's expression hardened. I get it. I'm a suspect. Everyone's a suspect. But think about it logically. If I wanted to help criminals rob the CEO, would I be stupid enough to use my own credentials? Would I leave a digital trail pointing directly at me? It was a fair point. Criminals made mistakes, but the scheme Kowalski was describing showed planning and sophistication. Using your own credentials to facilitate a crime was either incredibly stupid or a frame job. Why are you telling me this? Miles asked. Because you're the only person in this building who's not connected to the corporate hierarchy. You're not angling for promotions or protecting your reputation. You just did the right thing. Kowalski's voice dropped lower. And because I think whoever set this up is still here, still moving pieces around the board, and everyone's so focused on the obvious suspects that they're missing the real threat. What makes you think that? Because this morning, someone tried to access Isabella Grant's private server using a backdoor exploit that only 3 people in this building know exists. Me, my deputy director, Sarah Chen, no relation to Robert, and the contractor we hired to build the system 2 years ago. Miles felt his tactical awareness spike. Which contractor? Quantum Security Solutions, small firm specialized in corporate cybersecurity. They've done work for Preston Holdings for 5 years. Kowalski pulled out his phone, showing Miles a screenshot of login attempts. These access attempts happened at 6:47 a.m. this morning, right before the FBI arrived. Someone tried to break into Isabella's server, probably looking for evidence they could destroy or alter. Did they succeed? No, but they got close, closer than they should have without insider knowledge. Kowalski met Miles's eyes. I reported this to the FBI, but they think I'm trying to redirect suspicion, so I'm telling you because... Hell, I don't know why, because you saved Isabella's life, and maybe you'll actually listen. Miles took a photo of Kowalski's phone screen with his own device. I'll pass this to Detective Martinez. She's coordinating with the FBI. Good, because whoever's behind this isn't done yet. They've got too much to lose and too many resources to just give up because 2 meth-head criminals got caught. Kowalski walked away, leaving Miles with more questions than answers. If the IT director was telling the truth, then someone with high-level system access had tried to breach Isabella's server this morning. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Right as FBI agents were executing search warrants, someone had made a desperate play for digital evidence. Miles pulled out his phone and called Detective Martinez. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with focus. Carter, what have you got? He relayed Kowalski's information, describing the attempted server breach and the contractor connection. Martinez listened without interrupting, and Miles could hear her typing notes in the background. Quantum Security Solutions, she repeated. I'll pull their contractor agreements and personnel records. If someone from that firm has been maintaining access to Preston Holdings systems, they could have orchestrated this entire scheme remotely. Kowalski seemed genuinely scared. Either he's innocent and panicking, or he's a hell of an actor. My money's on innocent. We've been digging into his financials. The guy lives like a monk. Modest apartment, no luxury purchases. Most of his salary goes to paying off student loans and supporting his mother in a nursing home. He doesn't fit the profile for someone embezzling hundreds of thousands. What about Chen? Martinez paused. Chen's more complicated. He's got the authority to authorize large transfers, and his lifestyle exceeds his salary. Expensive cars, country club membership, private school tuition for 3 kids. But we can't prove he knew those transfers were fraudulent. He might have been manipulated, signed forms that looked legitimate on the surface. And Linda Marsh? Marsh is interesting. She's been depositing cash into her savings account, always keeping the amounts just under $10,000 to avoid triggering automatic bank reports. That's money laundering 101. But when we questioned her, she claimed the money came from her mother's estate, which we're still verifying. Martinez exhaled slowly. This case is like peeling an onion, Carter. Every layer we remove reveals another layer underneath. Miles moved toward the service elevator, keeping his voice low. What about the contractor, Quantum Security? I've got agents heading there now. We'll pull their employment records and interview anyone who worked on Preston Holdings accounts. Martinez's tone shifted, becoming more personal. How are you holding up? That threat text wasn't just smoke. I'm staying alert. That's not the same as being safe. Nothing's safe, detective. Just degrees of risk. Spoken like a soldier. Look, I know you're not the type to hide in your apartment, but maybe vary your routine? Take different routes home. Don't follow predictable patterns. Whoever sent that text might be watching, waiting for an opportunity. Miles thanked her and ended the call, her warning echoing in his mind. He'd been following the same routine for 3 years. Same L train, same route through his neighborhood, same coffee shop every morning. Predictability was dangerous when someone wanted you dead. He spent the rest of his morning shift in a state of heightened awareness, noting every person who glanced his way, every face that appeared more than once in different locations. Paranoia or vigilance. The line kept blurring. By noon, the FBI had finished their initial sweep and departed with several boxes of evidence. The building slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the tension remained, everyone aware that their workplace had become a crime scene and their colleagues potential suspects. Miles was eating lunch in the sub-basement maintenance area, a quiet corner where staff went to escape the corporate floors, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the area code was local. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end, then a male voice, muffled and distorted as if speaking through cloth. "You should have stayed out of this, soldier boy. Last chance to walk away." Miles's heart rate didn't spike. He'd received death threats before, calls from insurgents who'd gotten hold of military phone numbers, promising vengeance for operations that had disrupted their networks. This felt similar. Theatrical intimidation meant to provoke fear. "Who is this?" Miles kept his voice calm. "Someone who knows you're living on borrowed time. That mop handle won't save you next time. Neither will your military training. Walk away from Preston Tower. Forget what you saw. Forget Isabella Grant." The voice dropped lower, more menacing. "Or we'll make sure you forget everything permanently." The line went dead. Miles immediately called Martinez back, relaying the conversation word for word. She swore quietly. "They're escalating. That's a direct threat. We can try to trace the number, but it's probably another burner." Martinez paused. "Miles, I'm recommending protective custody, just for a few days until—" "No. You're being targeted by people who've already proven they're willing to use violence. This isn't about being tough or brave. This is about survival." "I understand the risk, but hiding won't solve this. Whoever's making these threats wants me scared and isolated. I'm not giving them that satisfaction." "Then at least let me assign a patrol car to your building. Uniformed presence might deter—" "Detective, with respect, a patrol car in my neighborhood will scare off more than just criminals. My neighbors don't trust police. A marked car sitting outside all night will make things worse, not better." Miles softened his tone. "I appreciate the concern, but I know how to handle threats." Martinez sighed deeply. "You military types are all the same, stubborn, self-reliant to a fault, convinced you can handle anything alone." "Not alone. I've got your number and Isabella's number. If something happens, you'll know immediately. If something happens, you might not get a chance to call." But Martinez's tone suggested she knew arguing was useless. "Fine, but you check in with me every 4 hours. Miss a check-in, I'm sending half the Chicago PD to your location." Miles agreed and hung up, staring at his phone. The threat had been specific enough to be credible, but vague enough to be untraceable. Someone was watching him, knew his background, understood that military training could be both an asset and a liability. The question was whether they'd actually follow through or if this was just psychological warfare, softening him up for something else. He finished his shift without incident, though every elevator chime and footstep behind him triggered a micro-assessment of threat level. By 6:00 p.m., when he signed out at the security desk, Miles felt the exhaustion that came from maintaining constant vigilance for 11 hours straight. The evening air hit him like a physical relief as he exited Preston Tower, Chicago's downtown bustling with Friday night energy. People streamed toward restaurants and bars, couples walking hand in hand, groups of coworkers celebrating the end of the week. Normal life, untouched by threats and conspiracies and death. Miles headed for the L train, scanning faces in the crowd with practiced subtlety. No one appeared to be following him, but that meant nothing. Professional surveillance was invisible by design, blending into the background noise of urban life. He was climbing the stairs to the elevated platform when he noticed the man in the gray hoodie. Not because he was doing anything overtly suspicious, but because of what he wasn't doing. He wasn't checking his phone or reading ads or displaying any of the typical behaviors of commuters waiting for trains. He was simply standing near the platform edge, hands in his pockets, eyes tracking Miles with predatory focus. Miles kept walking, moving past the man toward the far end of the platform. His peripheral vision caught the hoodie turning, following. Not subtle. Either the man was an amateur or he wanted Miles to know he was being followed. The platform was moderately crowded, maybe 30 people scattered along its length, most absorbed in their phones or conversations. Enough witnesses to deter violence, but not so many that someone couldn't disappear in the chaos if they moved quickly. Miles positioned himself near a support pillar, back protected, clear sight lines in both directions. The man in the gray hoodie stood about 20 feet away, no longer pretending to wait for a train. He was just watching. Minutes ticked by. No train arrived. The crowd thinned as some commuters gave up and left, seeking alternative routes. Miles checked the electronic board. Next train in 8 minutes. Too long. He pulled out his phone, keeping the gray hoodie in his peripheral vision, and texted Martinez. Being followed. Red line platform, Harrison Street. Gray hoodie, male, 6 feet, approximately 180 pounds. Looks like he wants me to know. 3 dots appeared immediately as Martinez typed her response. Stay in public. Patrol car en route. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes might as well be forever on an elevated platform with limited exits. The man in the gray hoodie started moving closer, his hands still buried in his pockets. Miles shifted his weight, ready to move in any direction, his body remembering combat stances drilled into muscle memory. Miles Carter? The man's voice was flat, emotionless. That's me. You've made some powerful people very nervous. That wasn't my intention. Intentions don't matter. Only consequences. The man pulled his right hand from his pocket, and Miles tensed, preparing for a weapon. But instead of a gun or knife, the man held a phone, turning it so Miles could see the screen. It was a photo. Isabella Grant walking into what looked like her apartment building, flanked by her 2 bodyguards. The angle suggested it had been taken from a vehicle across the street, a surveillance shot capturing her exact routine and location. Message is simple, the man continued. You stop asking questions, stop being a hero, stop involving yourself in things that don't concern you. Do that, and everyone stays safe. Don't do that. He gestured at the photo. Well, bodyguards can't protect someone 24/7. Miles felt cold fury settle over him, the kind of anger that sharpened thinking rather than clouding it. You're threatening her? I'm delivering a message. What you do with it is your choice. The man pocketed his phone. Smart thing would be to walk away. Dumb thing would be to keep playing soldier in a war you don't understand. In the distance, Miles heard sirens, police responding to Martinez's call. The man heard them too, his expression flickering with calculation. Think about it, he said, then turned and walked quickly toward the far stairs, descending 2 at a time. Miles started to follow, but his phone buzzed with another text from Martinez. Do not engage, let patrol handle it. He stopped at the top of the stairs, watching the gray hoodie disappear into street-level crowds. Following would be stupid. The man had probably anticipated pursuit, maybe even wanted it, leading Miles into a secondary ambush away from witnesses. Instead, Miles took photos of the platform, documenting the location and sightlines, then called Martinez. I'm fine, he said before she could ask. He delivered a message and left when he heard sirens. Describe him. Miles provided details. Height, weight, build, distinguishing features. The man had been careful to keep his face partially obscured by the hood, but Miles had caught enough to provide a rough description. He showed me a surveillance photo of Isabella. Recent, taken outside what looked like her apartment building. Miles's voice hardened. They're watching her. Probably have been since the robbery attempt. Martinez swore colorfully. I'll coordinate with her security detail, have them sweep for surveillance devices and change up her routine. As for you, I know. Vary my route, stay alert, call if anything happens. Miles, this is serious. These people are threatening the CEO of a major corporation. They've hired criminals for kidnapping, they're following you in public, they've got sophisticated surveillance capabilities. This isn't some low-level street gang. This is organized, well-funded, and desperate. I understand. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're acting like this is just another day at the office. You got a death threat this afternoon and a direct confrontation tonight. Most people would be terrified. I'm not most people. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. Martinez's tone softened slightly. Look, I get it. You're trained for this kind of pressure, but training doesn't make you bulletproof, and it doesn't make you less human. It's okay to be scared. Miles considered her words carefully. Was he scared? Not in the conventional sense. His heart wasn't racing, his hands weren't shaking, his thoughts remained clear and tactical. But underneath the operational calm, there was something else. Not fear exactly, but awareness of mortality. The understanding that one mistake could end everything. Maybe that was what fear became after you'd faced it enough times. Not panic, but respect. I'm careful, he said finally. That'll have to be enough. The patrol car arrived minutes later, 2 officers taking his statement and searching the platform for evidence they wouldn't find. Miles described the encounter in detail, professional and precise, giving them everything except his internal calculation that the man had been former military or law enforcement himself, something in his stance and controlled movement patterns. By the time the police cleared him to leave, it was past 7 p.m. and full darkness had settled over Chicago. Miles took a different L line than usual, then walked a circuitous route through his neighborhood, doubling back twice to confirm no one was following. The streets were quiet, local businesses closing up, residents hurrying home against the October chill. His apartment building was a 3-story walk-up in a marginal neighborhood, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions. Miles climbed to the second floor, checking that the nearly invisible thread he'd stretched across his doorframe was intact before unlocking the door. Inside, the studio apartment was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Narrow bed against one wall, kitchenette occupying a corner, a card table serving as desk and dining surface. Spartan by choice, minimal by necessity. Everything he owned fit in this single room, and most of it could be packed in an hour if he needed to move quickly. 3 years ago, when he'd first moved in, that had been important, maintaining the ability to disappear on short notice if his past caught up with him. Old habits from military intelligence operations where safe houses were temporary and attachment was a liability. Miles locked the door, engaged both deadbolts, and checked the windows. Secured, bars firmly in place. Then he sat on the bed and pulled out the $50,000 check Richard Preston had given him, staring at his name written in elegant script above more zeros than he'd seen on a single piece of paper in years. 2 nights ago. The money would buy time and distance, and eventually the people threatening him would forget about a janitor who'd gotten lucky. But Isabella would still be in danger. The investigation would continue without his observations and instincts. And somewhere in Preston Tower, a person who'd orchestrated kidnapping and embezzlement would still be free, still moving pieces on the board, still threatening anyone who got too close to the truth. Miles folded the check and put it in his wallet. Running had never really been an option. He made a simple dinner, pasta and canned sauce, the bachelor meal of choice, and ate while reviewing everything he knew. The embezzlement trail pointed toward Chen, but the CFO seemed more victim than perpetrator. Kowalski had the technical skills but lacked clear motive and was actively investigating the breach himself. Linda Marsh had unexplained income but also seemed terrified rather than calculating. And then there was Quantum Security Solutions, the contractor with high-level system access and the technical knowledge to orchestrate everything remotely. Miles opened his laptop, a basic model purchased 3 years ago for job searching and email, and did something he rarely did: actual research. He started with Quantum Security Solutions' website, a professional-looking page advertising cybersecurity services for corporate clients. Staff photos showed a dozen employees in business casual attire, most with impressive credentials from military or intelligence backgrounds. One face caught his attention: a man in his late 30s with close-cropped hair and alert eyes. The caption read, "Marcus Webb, Chief Security Consultant." Miles stared at the photo, something nagging at his memory. Webb, the same last name as the 2 attackers. Coincidence? Miles didn't believe in coincidences. He ran searches on Marcus Webb and found articles about his military service, Army Rangers, multiple deployments, honorable discharge 6 years ago. After leaving the military, he'd founded Quantum Security Solutions with a partner, building a successful consultancy specializing in corporate protection and digital security. Miles cross-referenced the dates. Quantum Security Solutions had begun working with Preston Holdings 5 years ago, right around the time Isabella's predecessor, Marcus Holloway, had taken over as CEO. The timing was interesting. His phone buzzed, Isabella's number. "Miles, I just heard about what happened at the L station. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Detective Martinez probably called you." "She did. And she also told me about the surveillance photo they showed you." Isabella's voice trembled with controlled anger. "They're watching my apartment. They know my routine. My security team's doing a full sweep, but Miles, I'm scared. Really scared." "That's what they want. Fear makes people make mistakes." "I know that intellectually. But emotionally, knowing someone's watching me, planning something," she trailed off. "How do you stay so calm?" "Practice. Lots of practice in situations where panic got people killed." "That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be, just honest." Miles softened his tone. "You've got good security. Let them do their job. And trust Detective Martinez. She's smart and thorough." "I do trust them, but I also trust you." Isabella paused. "That probably sounds strange. We barely know each other." "But you've saved my life, and you're being threatened because you refuse to back down. And that tells me more about your character than months of small talk would." Miles didn't know how to respond to that, so he changed subjects. "Do you know anyone at Quantum Security Solutions, the contractor that handles your cybersecurity?" "Quantum? Sure, they've been our vendor for years. David Kowalski works with them regularly. Why?" "Just following threads. One of the names came up in relation to the case." "Which name?" Miles hesitated, then decided she deserved to know. "Marcus Webb, Chief Security Consultant at Quantum. Same last name as the 2 men who attacked you." Silence stretched across the line. Then Isabella, her voice careful. "You think Quantum's involved?" "I think it's worth investigating. Someone with technical skills orchestrated this, and Quantum has both the skills and access to Preston Holdings systems." Miles pulled up the photo of Marcus Webb on his laptop. "Can you describe your interactions with Quantum? Who you dealt with? What kind of access they had?" "Mostly I worked with their account manager, Sarah Liu. She handled quarterly security audits and system updates. Very professional, never gave me any reason for concern." Isabella thought for a moment. "But now that you mention it, there was an incident about 2 months ago. David Kowalski found evidence that someone had been using a Quantum contractor's credentials to access our financial servers outside normal business hours. He flagged it as suspicious, asked me to investigate." "What did you find?" "Nothing conclusive. The contractor, I think his name was James something, claimed he'd been running after-hours maintenance. Kowalski wasn't satisfied with that explanation, but we couldn't prove anything improper." Miles felt pieces clicking into place. "What happened to this James?" "He left Quantum about 6 weeks ago. Sarah Liu said he'd taken a position with another firm, but she was vague about the details. 6 weeks ago would have been right when the embezzlement scheme was ramping up, when someone would have needed to cover their tracks by removing witnesses or accomplices who might talk." "I need to talk to Kowalski," Miles said. "First thing tomorrow. This contractor might be the connection we're missing." "Miles, that's Detective Martinez's job. You're a janitor, I know." He smiled despite the situation. "But janitors notice things other people miss. We're invisible, which means we see everything." Isabella laughed softly, the sound carrying relief and appreciation. "You're full of surprises, Miles Carter." "Not really. Just someone who cleans up messes. Sometimes the messes are literal, sometimes they're metaphorical. But the job's basically the same." They talked for a few more minutes, Isabella sharing details about increased security measures, and Miles offering reassurance that felt hollow, even as he spoke it. When they finally hung up, Miles sat in his quiet apartment, surrounded by 3 years of deliberate simplicity, and acknowledged what he'd been avoiding since the robbery attempt. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. Maybe he'd never really been just a janitor, no matter how hard he tried to pretend. The soldier, the captain, the leader who'd made life and death decisions under fire, that person hadn't disappeared when he'd hung up his uniform. He'd just been waiting, dormant, for a reason to resurface. Preston Tower had given him that reason. Isabella Grant had given him that reason. And now, whether he wanted it or not, Miles was back in the fight. He spent the next hour preparing, checking his phone for Martinez's check-in protocol, reviewing the layout of Preston Tower in his mind, considering approaches and contingencies for various scenarios. Old habits, old training, old instincts that had never really faded. At midnight, Miles lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to his neighborhood's night sounds. Distant traffic, occasional sirens, the couple upstairs arguing about something inconsequential. Normal life happening all around him while he plotted how to catch criminals and protect someone he barely knew. Sleep came eventually, but it was light and tactical. The kind of rest where part of your brain stayed alert, monitoring for threats even in unconsciousness. Miles had lived this way for years during deployment, and apparently his body remembered how. Tomorrow would bring answers or more questions. Either way, he'd be ready. The janitor had put down his mop and picked up something else. Not a weapon exactly, but purpose. And once you remembered what purpose felt like, going back to empty anonymity became impossible. Miles Carter, former Special Forces captain, closed his eyes and let the darkness take him, knowing that dawn would bring the next battle in a war he hadn't chosen but couldn't abandon. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain, Chicago's October weather turning moody and unpredictable. Miles woke at 5:30 from habit rather than necessity. The building didn't require weekend maintenance crews, and his schedule gave him Saturdays and Sundays off. But sleep felt impossible with everything churning in his mind, so he dressed in civilian clothes and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The neighborhood was quiet except for a few early risers heading to opening shifts, and Miles used the solitude to run through his old exercise routine. Push-ups against a park bench, pull-ups on playground equipment, wind sprints along empty sidewalks. His body protested, 12 years older and carrying injuries that never fully healed. But the familiar burn of physical exertion cleared his head, sharpening his focus. By 7 o'clock, he was showered and dressed, sitting in a corner booth at Maria's diner with black coffee and scrambled eggs. The diner was a neighborhood institution, the kind of place where regulars knew each other's orders and strangers were politely ignored. Maria herself worked the counter, a 60-year-old Puerto Rican woman who'd been serving breakfast to this community for 30 years. "You look troubled, Miles," she said, refilling his coffee without being asked. "Everything okay?" Miles managed a smile. "Just work stuff, nothing serious." Work stuff. Maria studied him with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd seen every variation of human trouble. The kind of work stuff that has you exercising at dawn and drinking coffee like it's medicine? That's more than nothing. "I'll be fine, Maria. Promise." She patted his shoulder with maternal concern. "You're a good man. Whatever it is, you'll handle it. But don't forget to eat. Can't solve problems on an empty stomach." Miles forced himself to finish the eggs, even though his appetite had disappeared. Maria was right about one thing. Tactical operations required fuel, and he needed to stay sharp. After paying his check, he walked 6 blocks to an internet cafe that opened early for freelancers and night owls needing connectivity. He paid cash for an hour of computer time and settled into a private booth using the cafe's anonymized connection to dig deeper into quantum security solutions. Public records showed the company had been founded 7 years ago by Marcus Webb and a partner named Thomas Brennan, both former military with security clearances and combat experience. Their client list included several Fortune 500 companies, government contractors, and financial institutions. Impressive credentials which made their potential involvement in corporate crime more alarming. If quantum was dirty, they weren't street-level criminals stumbling into opportunity. They were professionals who understood systems, vulnerabilities, and how to exploit both. Miles searched for the contractor Isabella had mentioned, James something, who'd left Quantum 6 weeks ago. It took 20 minutes of cross-referencing LinkedIn profiles and company announcements before he found a match. James Pritchard, former Quantum employee, specialized in financial system security. His LinkedIn showed he'd transitioned to private consulting in late August with no specifics about his new position. Private consulting, the professional euphemism for everything from legitimate independent work to criminal activity that required plausible cover stories. Miles screenshotted Pritchard's profile and sent it to Detective Martinez with a message. Possible lead, former quantum contractor with access to Preston Holdings financial systems. Left company 6 weeks ago, right when embezzlement escalated. Worth investigating? Her response came within minutes. Already on it, FBI pulled Quantum's employee records yesterday. Pritchard's on our interview list. How'd you find him? Isabella mentioned an incident 2 months ago involving suspicious after-hours access. Pritchard was the contractor involved. That's good intel. You should have been a detective. I was better with a rifle than a notepad. Could have fooled me. Check in later. We're executing more warrants this morning at Quantum's offices. Things are moving fast. Miles logged off and left the cafe, his mind racing through scenarios. If Pritchard had been using his quantum access to embezzle funds from Preston Holdings, and if Marcus Webb had provided him with the tools or cover to do it, then the entire security company could be compromised. That would explain the sophisticated planning, the inside knowledge, and the ability to coordinate criminal activity while maintaining plausible deniability. But it raised another question. Why target Isabella specifically? The embezzlement had been ongoing for months before she'd been hired. Why escalate to kidnapping just because she'd started investigating financial irregularities? Unless Isabella had gotten closer to the truth than anyone realized, unless her investigation had threatened to expose not just embezzlement, but something larger, money laundering, corporate espionage, connections to organized crime. The kind of exposure that would destroy quantum security solutions and send multiple people to federal prison. That level of threat would justify desperate measures. Miles was walking past a bodega when his phone rang. David Kowalski's name flashed on the screen. Miles had given him his number yesterday during their conversation about the server breach. Kowalski, what's up? Carter, I need to meet with you. Now. It's important. Kowalski's voice carried an edge of panic that immediately raised Miles's alert level. Where are you? Coffee shop on West Adams, 3 blocks from Preston Tower. How fast can you get here? Miles checked his location. He was on the south side, at least 40 minutes from downtown by L train. 45 minutes. What's this about? Not over the phone, just get here. Kowalski hung up abruptly. Miles immediately texted Martinez. Kowalski wants to meet, urgent. Coffee shop West Adams. Could be a lead or a trap. Advise? Her response was instant. Meet him, but stay in public. I'll have plainclothes nearby. Text me the exact address. Miles caught the next train downtown, using the 40-minute ride to run through possibilities. Kowalski had seemed genuinely frightened yesterday, convinced he was being framed for the security breach. If he'd discovered new evidence or figured out who was really behind the scheme, he might be desperate to share that information with someone he trusted. Or he could be setting Miles up, luring him into a confrontation away from Preston Tower's cameras and witnesses. The gray hoodie from last night had been former military. Maybe Quantum had multiple operators working the case, coordinating attacks and intimidation. Miles's hand drifted to his pocket, where he carried a folding knife. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. He'd left the army behind, but apparently the army skills kept proving useful. The coffee shop was a hipster establishment with exposed brick walls and baristas sporting impressive beards. Miles spotted Kowalski immediately, sitting at a corner table near the emergency exit, laptop open in front of him, eyes darting nervously around the room. The IT director looked like he hadn't slept. Rumpled clothes, unkempt hair, the jittery energy of someone running on caffeine and adrenaline. Miles sat down across from him, positioning himself so he could see both the front entrance and the emergency exit. You okay? No, definitely not okay. Kowalski glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. I found something that explains everything and also makes everything worse. Show me. Kowalski turned his laptop so Miles could see the screen. It displayed what looked like encrypted chat logs, rows of messages between 2 users identified only as architect and engineer. I pulled these from a backup server that Quantum maintains for disaster recovery, Kowalski explained. Technically, I shouldn't have access anymore since the FBI seized our systems, but I have backdoor credentials they don't know about. These messages were deleted from the primary servers but survived in the backup. Miles scanned the messages, reading snippets of conversation. Architect. Target is getting too close. Need to accelerate timeline. Engineer. Kidnapping carries federal charges. Are you certain? Architect. No choice. She's found the Cayman accounts. Another week and she'll trace everything back to us. Engineer. The Webb brothers aren't professionals. High risk of complications. Architect. They're disposable. If they fail, we adjust. If they succeed, we're clear. Miles felt cold certainty settle in his gut. These messages proved premeditation, proved that Isabella's kidnapping attempt had been orchestrated by people inside the conspiracy rather than hired criminals acting independently. Who were architect and engineer? What? Miles asked. That's what I've been trying to figure out. Kowalski pulled up another screen showing user authentication logs. The accounts were created using admin-level credentials from Quantum Security Solutions. Architects' login patterns match someone who works primarily East Coast hours. Engineers' patterns suggest West Coast or someone working odd hours. Can you trace them to specific people? Not directly. They used VPNs and proxy servers to mask their physical locations, but I can narrow it down based on technical capabilities and access levels. Kowalski pulled up a document listing Quantum employees with sufficient security clearance. Only 7 people at Quantum could have created these accounts and maintained them without detection. Marcus Webb, Thomas Brennan, James Pritchard, Sarah Liu, and 3 senior engineers. Miles studied the names, his tactical mind sorting through options. Pritchard left 6 weeks ago. Could he still have access? Technically, yes. When employees leave, their primary accounts are disabled, but if they'd created secondary accounts or backdoors before departure, those could remain active indefinitely. Kowalski's expression darkened. That's actually standard practice in cybersecurity, maintaining hidden access for emergency situations. Problem is, it can also be used for malicious purposes. So Pritchard could be engineer operating remotely after leaving Quantum. Exactly. And if he partnered with someone still inside Quantum, someone with current access and authority, they could coordinate the entire operation while maintaining plausible deniability. Miles thought about the gray hoodie from last night, the surveillance photo of Isabella, the sophisticated planning behind everything. You said architect works East Coast hours. Who at Quantum fits that pattern? Kowalski pulled up personnel files. Marcus Webb is based in Boston, where Quantum has their headquarters. He travels frequently but maintains East Coast schedule. Sarah Liu is also Boston-based, senior account manager. Thomas Brennan splits time between Boston and Chicago. What about the timing? When did these messages start? Kowalski scrolled through the chat logs. First message is from 9 months ago, just after Isabella was hired as CEO. He highlighted a particular exchange. Architect. New CEO is a problem. Background in forensic accounting. She'll find the discrepancies. Engineer. Recommend accelerating withdrawal timeline. Can have accounts cleared in 6 months. Architect. Agreed. Begin preparations for emergency extraction if necessary. Miles felt the pieces aligning. They knew Isabella would find the embezzlement because of her background, so they started planning an exit strategy. Either escape with the stolen money or eliminate the threat she represented. That's what I think too. Kowalski closed his laptop, his hands shaking slightly. Miles, I brought this to you first because I don't know who else to trust. The FBI is investigating Quantum, but if someone high up in the company is architect, they could have warning systems in place, contingencies for when law enforcement gets close. And if they figure out I found these messages, he didn't need to finish the thought. Miles understood. Kowalski had just made himself a target by uncovering evidence that could send multiple people to prison for decades. You need to give this to Detective Martinez immediately, Miles said, and you need protection until this is over. I know, I'm meeting her in an hour at the FBI field office, but I wanted you to see this first, wanted someone else to know in case... Kowalski's voice trailed off. In case something happens to me. Miles reached across the table, gripping Kowalski's shoulder firmly. Nothing's going to happen to you. We get you to the FBI, you hand over this evidence, and they put you in protective custody until arrests are made. By tonight, this whole thing could be over. You really believe that? Miles didn't, but he said it anyway. I've seen worse situations resolve faster. Trust the process. They left the coffee shop together, Miles scanning the street for threats, while Kowalski clutched his laptop like it contained nuclear launch codes. The morning had turned properly gray now, rain starting to fall in light mist that blurred the city's sharp edges. Miles walked Kowalski to the L station, staying close, alert for any sign of surveillance or hostile intent. The platform was moderately crowded with weekend travelers, families heading downtown for museums and shopping. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that two men standing among them were carrying evidence of federal crimes and conspiracy. The train arrived and Miles helped Kowalski board, standing near the doors to maintain visual contact through the windows. "Text me when you're safe with Martinez," Miles called out as the doors started closing. Kowalski nodded, managing a weak smile. "Thanks for listening, man, for taking this seriously. Just don't do anything stupid between here and the FBI office. Stay alert. Stay—" Miles's words were cut off by the train doors closing. He watched through the window as the train pulled away, Kowalski finding a seat near the middle of the car, laptop clutched to his chest. Miles stood on the platform as the train disappeared into the tunnel, a sense of unease settling over him that he couldn't quite explain. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't identify what. Maybe it was the timing, Kowalski discovering critical evidence just as the FBI was raiding Quantum. Maybe it was the chat logs themselves, almost too perfect in their incrimination. Or maybe it was just paranoia, the product of too many combat missions where the obvious answer masked a more dangerous truth. His phone buzzed. "Martinez. Kowalski just texted. He's on his way. You did good getting him to come in." Miles texted back. "Something feels off. Can't explain it. Maybe just nerves. Your instincts have been solid so far. What's bothering you?" Miles considered how to articulate the feeling. Evidence was too easy to find, like it was left there for someone to discover. "You think it's a plant? Fake evidence to redirect the investigation?" "I don't know. But architect and engineer are too careful to leave chat logs on a backup server. Why not scrub everything?" 3 dots appeared as Martinez typed. Then, "Could be arrogance. Criminals often think they're smarter than investigators. Or could be your paranoia is justified. Either way, we'll verify everything Kowalski brings in. Don't worry." But Miles was worrying. He left the L station and started walking, letting his feet carry him without specific destination while his mind worked through scenarios. If the chat logs were fake, planted to frame someone at Quantum, then who benefited? If they were real, why would sophisticated operators make such an obvious mistake? Unless the mistake was intentional. Unless someone wanted investigators to find those messages, wanted to point suspicion in a specific direction while the real architect of the scheme remained hidden. Miles was so absorbed in thought that he almost missed the black SUV following him. Almost, but not quite. His peripheral vision caught the vehicle matching his pace for 2 blocks, staying far enough back to avoid obvious surveillance, but close enough to maintain contact. He turned down a side street, testing whether the SUV would follow. It did, slowing to maintain distance. Miles's heart rate elevated slightly, adrenaline beginning its familiar work of sharpening reflexes and heightening awareness. He had 3 options: confront the vehicle directly, try to lose it in the urban landscape, or call for help and wait for police response. Each option carried risks. Confrontation could escalate to violence. Evasion might work, but would confirm he'd noticed the surveillance. Calling police would take time and might spook whoever was in the SUV. Miles chose option 4, lead them somewhere he controlled. He walked toward the Chicago Riverwalk, a public space with multiple exits, good sightlines, and enough weekend foot traffic to discourage overt violence. The SUV continued following, maintaining its distance. Through the tinted windows, Miles couldn't see how many occupants or whether they were armed, but his instincts screamed that this wasn't coincidental. He reached the Riverwalk and descended the stairs to the lower level, where restaurants and pedestrian paths ran alongside the water. The rain had picked up slightly, driving some visitors to seek shelter, but leaving enough people that Miles wasn't isolated. He positioned himself near a busy outdoor seating area, back to a wall, clear view of the stairs where anyone following would have to appear. 2 minutes later, 2 men descended the stairs. The first was in his 40s, built like a wrestler, wearing a windbreaker that bulged slightly on his right hip. Holstered weapon. The second was younger, leaner, with the alert posture and scanning eyes of military or law enforcement training. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They walked directly toward Miles, movements purposeful and coordinated. Miles shifted his weight, ready to move in any direction, his hand drifting toward the folding knife in his pocket. Around him, weekend tourists laughed and took photos, completely unaware of the confrontation developing in their midst. The older man stopped 10 feet away, hands visible and empty. "Mr. Carter, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not here. Too many civilians." The man glanced around. "Our vehicle's parked on Lower Wacker. Private conversation, no threats, just information you need to hear." "Who are you?" "My name's Thomas Brennan. I'm co-founder of Quantum Security Solutions." He pulled out a business card, tossing it so it landed at Miles's feet. "And I think we both want the same thing, to stop whoever's behind this mess before more people get hurt." Miles didn't pick up the card, didn't take his eyes off the two men. "If you wanted to talk, you could have called. Following me in a black SUV sends a different message." Brennan smiled without humor. "Fair point, but phone calls can be traced, meetings at coffee shops can be surveilled. What I need to tell you can't be overheard by the wrong people. Too many lives at stake." "Including yours?" "Especially mine." Brennan's expression turned grim. "Someone's setting up Quantum to take the fall for crimes we didn't commit. The FBI's tearing apart our company based on evidence that's either fabricated or carefully manipulated. And the real criminals, the people who actually orchestrated this, are sitting back watching us destroy each other." Miles studied Brennan carefully, looking for deception markers. Inconsistent eye contact, nervous gestures, rehearsed cadence. He saw tension and exhaustion, but not obvious dishonesty. Either Brennan was telling the truth or he was an exceptional liar. "What makes you think I'd believe you?" "Because you're not stupid. You saw combat, you understand tactical misdirection. And you've been asking questions about James Pritchard, which means you're starting to see the pattern." Brennan took a calculated risk, stepping closer. "Pritchard didn't leave Quantum voluntarily. He was fired after I discovered he'd been using our infrastructure to embezzle from clients. I reported him to law enforcement, but before they could arrest him, he disappeared." "When was this?" 6 weeks ago. Right around the time someone started planning Isabella Grant's kidnapping." Brennan's voice hardened. "Pritchard knew I was on to him, knew his time was running out. So he went underground and started cleaning up loose ends. Anyone who could connect him to the embezzlement became a target." Miles processed this information, comparing it against what Kowalski had discovered. The chat logs between architect and engineer, those implicate someone currently at Quantum. "I know. Kowalski shared them with me before coming to you." Brennan pulled out his own laptop, balancing it on a nearby railing. "But look at this. These are the same chat logs pulled from our actual backup server, not the doctored version Kowalski found. Watch the timestamps." He pulled up 2 sets of messages side by side. The content was identical, but the timestamps were different. Kowalski's version showed messages spread over 9 months, while Brennan's version showed them all created within a 3-hour window 2 weeks ago. "Someone forged these conversations," Brennan explained. "Took real technical language, real usernames, and backdated them to create a false timeline. They knew investigators would eventually find the backup server, knew someone like Kowalski would dig deep enough to discover hidden evidence. It's misdirection, Carter. Sophisticated, well-planned misdirection designed to destroy Quantum while the real criminals escape." Miles stared at these dual timelines, his tactical mind racing through implications. If Brennan was telling the truth, then Kowalski was currently on his way to the FBI with fabricated evidence that would deepen the investigation into Quantum, while the actual perpetrator, Pritchard, or whoever had hired him, remained free. But if Brennan was lying, if this was itself a misdirection, then Miles was being manipulated into doubting legitimate evidence. The problem with complex conspiracies was that truth and deception became increasingly difficult to distinguish. Everyone had motives to lie, and the most convincing liars were often those telling partial truths. "Why come to me?" Miles asked. "Why not go directly to the FBI with this?" Because the FBI is focused on Quantum as the target. They've invested resources and credibility into that theory. If I walk in claiming the evidence is fake, I look like a desperate criminal trying to muddy the investigation. Brennan closed his laptop. But you're an outsider. You're not connected to corporate politics or law enforcement bureaucracy. You've already proven you see things clearly and act decisively. If you believe me, if you help prove these logs are forgeries, the FBI might actually listen. The younger man, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. We have a digital forensics expert who can prove the timestamps were altered, but we need time to compile the evidence and someone the FBI trusts to vouch for its legitimacy. That's you, Carter. You're the hero who saved the CEO, the guy with no apparent motive to lie. Your word carries weight. Miles looked between them, weighing risks and probabilities. Trust was a weapon that could be turned against you if misplaced, but suspecting everyone and trusting no one was also a path to paralysis. Give me your expert's contact information, Miles said finally. I'll have Detective Martinez vet them independently. If your story checks out, I'll help. If it doesn't, I'll make sure she knows you tried to manipulate me. Brennan nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'll send you the details. He paused. But Carter, you need to understand something. If Pritchard's behind this, he's not working alone. He's got resources, technical capabilities, probably military contacts from his time in service. The gray hoodie who threatened you yesterday? That was one of his people. The SUV following you this morning? That was us trying to warn you before Pritchard's team made another move. Warn me about what? About Kowalski. Brennan's expression turned grave. Those chat logs he found? They weren't just bait for investigators. They were bait for Kowalski specifically. Pritchard needed someone with system access to discover the evidence and bring it to authorities, lending it credibility. But now that Kowalski's served his purpose, he's a loose end. Cold realization washed over Miles. The L train. You think they're going to hit him before he reaches the FBI? I think that if Pritchard wants Kowalski dead, a crowded train is actually the perfect location. Push him at the right moment, make it look like an accident. Chaos ensures no reliable witnesses. Brennan was already moving toward the stairs. We need to warn him now, before he reaches his transfer point. Miles pulled out his phone, dialing Kowalski's number. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. He's not answering. Then we need to intercept him. Brennan broke into a run toward the stairs, his partner following. Which train was he taking? Red Line South, transferring at Roosevelt to get to the FBI office. Miles was running now too, his knee protesting but adrenaline overriding the pain. If they're going to make a move, it'll be at the transfer point. Crowded platform, easy to disappear in the confusion. They reached the black SUV on Lower Walker, all 3 men piling in as Brennan gunned the engine. The vehicle surged forward, weaving through weekend traffic with practiced aggression. The younger operative, Brennan had called him Davis, pulled out a laptop and started typing rapidly. I'm accessing CTA camera feeds, Davis explained. If we can spot Kowalski on the platform, we can... There. Miles pointed at one of Davis's screens showing Roosevelt Station's north platform. Among the crowd of waiting passengers was Kowalski, laptop bag over his shoulder, checking his phone with apparent anxiety. And 20 feet behind him, partially obscured by other passengers, was a figure in a gray hoodie. That's him, Miles said. Same guy from yesterday. Brennan swore and accelerated, running a red light at the intersection. Davis, call CPD, report a potential assault in progress at Roosevelt Station. Get uniforms there now. Davis was already on his phone, speaking urgently to emergency dispatch. Miles kept his eyes on the laptop screen, watching Kowalski move toward the platform edge as a train approached. The gray hoodie shifted closer, positioning himself directly behind Kowalski in the crush of boarding passengers. We're 3 minutes out, Brennan said, his voice tight. That's not going to be fast enough. Miles made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called Detective Martinez. Martinez, Kowalski's in danger. Roosevelt Station, North Platform. Someone's going to push him in front of the train. What? How do you know? But I'm watching it happen on security feeds. Get units there now. Miles ended the call and turned to Brennan. Can we contact station security directly? Already tried, Davis said. Line's busy. Weekend staff's minimal, and they're dealing with some drunk teenagers on the south platform. On the screen, the train pulled into the station. Doors opened and passengers began the complicated dance of exiting and boarding, the platform becoming a churning mass of humanity. Kowalski moved toward an open door, laptop clutched to his chest. The gray hoodie moved with him, closing the distance to less than 5 feet. Miles felt helpless rage building in his chest. They were going to watch Kowalski die, watch him get shoved into the path of several tons of moving steel, and there was nothing they could do except arrive to find his broken body on the tracks. Then Kowalski stumbled, not dramatically, just a small trip over someone's foot or a crack in the platform, but enough to make him step sideways, out of the gray hoodie's immediate reach. The train doors started to close, and the gray hoodie hesitated, caught between pursuing Kowalski onto the train or aborting the attempt. He chose abort, stepping back as the doors sealed and the train pulled away with Kowalski safely aboard. Miles exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "He's okay. He's on the train." "For now," Brennan said grimly, "but that train stops 4 more times before the FBI office. They'll try again." They reached Roosevelt Station just as the train departed, Brennan parking illegally in a loading zone. All 3 men sprinted for the platform stairs, Miles's injured knee screaming protests that he ignored. They reached the platform in time to see the gray hoodie descending the opposite stairs, disappearing into the street-level crowds. "Davis, follow him," Brennan ordered. "I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, but do not engage, understand? Just surveillance." Davis nodded and took off at a run, his athletic build eating up distance. Brennan turned to Miles, breathing hard. "We need to get ahead of Kowalski's train, cut him off before the next attempt." They ran back to the SUV, Brennan pulling out his phone to track the train's progress, while Miles navigated based on his knowledge of the L system's routes. The vehicle weaved through downtown traffic, Brennan running lights and ignoring speed limits with the confidence of someone who knew how to drive aggressively without causing accidents. "Next stop is Monroe," Miles said. "We can intercept there." They reached Monroe Station with 30 seconds to spare, both men taking the stairs 2 at a time. The platform was less crowded than Roosevelt, mostly tourists consulting maps and phones. Miles scanned faces looking for threats while Brennan positioned himself near where the train would stop. The train arrived, brakes squealing. Doors opened and passengers poured out. Miles spotted Kowalski in the third car, still clutching his laptop, looking around nervously as if sensing danger without understanding its source. Miles pushed through the crowd. "Kowalski!" The IT director's head snapped up, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and relief. "Carter, what are you doing here?" "Saving your life. Again." Miles grabbed Kowalski's arm and pulled him away from the train toward the exit stairs. "Someone tried to push you at Roosevelt. They're going to try again unless we get you to safety." "What? I didn't see anyone." "You weren't supposed to. Now move." Brennan appeared on Kowalski's other side, creating a protective bracket as they hustled down the stairs. Kowalski's confusion turned to fear as the reality sank in. "The laptop," he said suddenly. "If they're after me because of what I found, then we need to get that evidence to the FBI immediately," Brennan finished. "My vehicle's out front. We'll drive you there directly. No more trains, no more exposure." They reached street level and headed for the SUV, Miles maintaining constant surveillance of their surroundings. Every person on the sidewalk was a potential threat. Every vehicle a possible attack platform. His combat instincts were firing on all cylinders, reading body language and positioning with the automatic assessment that had kept him alive through 3 tours. A motorcycle accelerated from a side street, engine roaring as it cut through traffic toward them. Miles saw the rider's hand move to his jacket and reacted on pure instinct, shoving both Kowalski and Brennan behind a parked delivery truck. The motorcycle roared past, the rider's hand emerging with what looked like a gun, but might have been nothing at all. They crouched behind the truck for 10 seconds, breathing hard, before Miles risked a look. The motorcycle was gone, disappeared into city traffic. "Did you see a weapon?" Brennan asked. "Couldn't tell. Might have been paranoia. Or might have been another attempt." Brennan pulled out his keys. "Let's stop taking chances. Vehicle's 20 feet away. We move together. Stay low. Get Kowalski inside and armored." They made the sprint to the SUV without incident, piling in with Kowalski sandwiched in the back seat between Miles and Brennan. The vehicle's windows were bulletproof, Brennan explained, and the doors reinforced. Corporate security vehicle retrofitted for high-risk transport. FBI office is 10 minutes from here, Brennan said, pulling into traffic. Davis is still tailing the gray hoodie, and Martinez is coordinating with federal agents to receive us when we arrive. You're almost safe, Kowalski. Almost. The word hung in the air, a reminder that safety was relative and threats could materialize from anywhere. Kowalski clutched his laptop, his earlier confidence completely shattered. I'm sorry. I thought I was helping. I thought finding those chat logs would break the case open. You did help, Miles said, though he wasn't entirely certain anymore. Even if the evidence was planted, it tells us something about who we're dealing with and how they operate. Which brings us back to Pritchard, Brennan said. He's got the technical skills, the inside knowledge, and the motive. He stole from Preston Holdings for months, got caught, and now he's trying to cover his tracks by destroying Quantum and eliminating anyone who might connect him to the crimes. Miles considered this theory, testing it against everything he'd observed. It made sense, mostly. But something still nagged at him, some detail that didn't quite fit the pattern. They were 2 blocks from the FBI office when Miles's phone rang. Detective Martinez. Miles, where are you? 2 minutes from the FBI office. We've got Kowalski and he's safe. Good. Because we just picked up James Pritchard. Miles felt his mental model of the case shift. You found him? Anonymous tip came in 30 minutes ago. Gave us an address on the north side. We raided it and found Pritchard with approximately $200,000 in cash, fake passports, and a one-way ticket to Colombia. Martinez's voice carried grim satisfaction. He's in custody and lawyering up, but we've got him cold on money laundering at minimum, probably the embezzlement too once forensic accounting finishes. Miles glanced at Brennan, who was listening intently while navigating final turns to the FBI building. What about the kidnapping? Did he admit to hiring the Webb brothers? Not yet, but we found encrypted communications on his laptop that matched the timeline. FBI's cryptography team is breaking the encryption now. Should have confirmation within hours. It should have felt like victory. They'd caught the primary suspect, secured the evidence, protected the witnesses. The case was essentially solved. So why did Miles feel like they were still missing something crucial? They pulled into the FBI building's underground parking, where armed agents waited to escort them inside. Kowalski was immediately taken to a secure interview room while Miles and Brennan were processed as witnesses, their statements recorded and compared against existing evidence. Detective Martinez arrived an hour later, looking exhausted but satisfied. She pulled Miles aside into a quiet hallway. This is wrapping up faster than I expected, she said. Pritchard's at the center of everything. Embezzlement, kidnapping conspiracy, witness intimidation. With him in custody, the immediate threats neutralized. What about the gray hoodie? The guy who's been following me tried to push Kowalski. We're working on identification. Pritchard's not talking, but his phone records show connections to several individuals with criminal backgrounds. We'll find him. Martinez studied Miles carefully. You don't look relieved. Because I'm not sure we've got the whole picture. This feels... Miles searched for the right words. Too neat, too self-contained. Sometimes cases are neat. Sometimes the obvious suspect is actually the guilty party. Martinez squeezed his shoulder. You did good work here, Miles. You protected Isabella, saved Kowalski, helped us catch Pritchard. Take the win. Miles wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the satisfaction of a mission accomplished, threats neutralized, objectives achieved. But his combat experience had taught him to distrust easy victories, to look for the ambush hidden behind apparent success. Still, maybe Martinez was right. Maybe he was looking for complexity where simple answers existed. Maybe the janitor who'd stumbled into heroism had completed his accidental mission and could return to his quiet life. Miles was filling out his final witness statement when Isabella arrived, her security detail in tow. She spotted him across the FBI office and hurried over, her composure cracking to reveal genuine concern. Miles, are you okay? Martinez told me what happened at the train station. I'm fine. Kowalski's fine. Pritchard's in custody. I know, Isabella's voice caught slightly. This whole thing has been surreal. 2 days ago, I was worried about quarterly reports and board meetings. Now I'm in the FBI office because someone tried to kidnap me and embezzle millions from my company. Welcome to the exciting world of corporate leadership. Isabella laughed despite everything, the sound carrying release and relief. I'm glad you can still find humor in this. She glanced around, ensuring privacy before continuing. Richard Preston wants to meet with you Monday morning, formally this time. He wants to publicly acknowledge what you did, offer you that security position again, probably give you another check. I already told him I'm not interested in corporate security. I know, and I'll tell him the same thing. But Miles, you should prepare for attention. This story's going to hit the media. Heroic janitor stops corporate kidnapping, helps FBI catch criminal mastermind. You're going to be news whether you want it or not. The thought made Miles's stomach sink. Attention meant scrutiny, meant people digging into his past, meant the quiet anonymity he'd built over 3 years evaporating overnight. But it was also inevitable. You couldn't save a CEO and help solve a federal case without someone noticing. I'll deal with it, he said simply. I know you will. Isabella hesitated, then asked the question Miles knew was coming. What happens now, for us, I mean? Do you just go back to being the janitor who cleans my floors? Miles considered the question carefully. What did happen now? Could he really return to pushing his cart through empty corridors, pretending the last few days hadn't changed everything? Could Isabella go back to being just another executive? He nodded at politely. I don't know, he admitted. I guess we figure it out as we go. That's a very unsatisfying answer. It's the only honest one I've got. Isabella nodded slowly, accepting this. Then I guess we figure it out together. She stood to leave, then turned back. Miles? Thank you. For everything. For saving my life, for believing me when I said I was in danger, for not walking away when things got complicated. You didn't have to do any of that. Yes, I did, Miles said quietly. I really did. After Isabella left, Miles sat alone in the FBI hallway, processing everything that had happened since Thursday night. In 72 hours, he'd gone from invisible janitor to accidental hero, from deliberately forgotten to forcibly remembered. And somewhere in that transformation, he'd discovered something he'd lost 3 years ago in the aftermath of that failed mission in Afghanistan. Purpose that extended beyond himself. Connection to people who mattered. The understanding that his skills and experience weren't liabilities to be hidden, but assets to be used. Maybe Detective Martinez was right. Maybe this was the win, clean and complete. Or maybe it was just the beginning of something much more complicated, and the real battle was still ahead. Either way, Miles Carter wasn't running anymore. Whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else. Eyes open, skills ready, and committed to doing what needed doing regardless of personal cost. The janitor had put down his mop. But whether that meant picking up a new uniform or forging a different path entirely remained to be seen. For now, though, it was enough to know that when crisis had come calling, he'd answered. And in that answer, he'd found pieces of himself he thought were lost forever. Sunday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, Chicago's weather making one of its mercurial shifts from gray threat to brilliant clarity. Miles woke early again, though this time the sleeplessness came not from anxiety, but from his mind refusing to quiet, replaying the events of the past 4 days like a film stuck on loop. He made coffee in his tiny kitchenette and sat by the window watching his neighborhood come to life. A young mother walked past with a stroller, an elderly man shuffled toward the corner bodega for his morning paper, teenagers congregated on a stoop with the aimless energy of youth facing another day with nowhere particular to be. Normal life, the kind Miles had craved when he'd first arrived in this city seeking invisibility. But invisibility felt different now. Not like safety, but like hiding. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. Pritchard's lawyer cut a deal. He's talking. You should hear this. Can you come to the precinct? Miles texted back confirmation and dressed quickly, taking the L train to the station where Martinez had her office. The weekend meant lighter crowds and faster travel, and he made the trip in under 40 minutes. Martinez met him at the front desk, leading him through corridors that smelled of industrial cleaner and burnt coffee to a small conference room where FBI Special Agent Deshawn waited with a tablet and a grim expression. Mr. Carter, Deshawn said by way of greeting, thanks for coming in on a Sunday. What we learned this morning changes things significantly. Miles sat down across from them, noting the tension in their postures. Pritchard confessed? Partially, Martinez said. He admitted to embezzling from Preston Holdings over 8 months, using his quantum security access to create backdoor accounts and siphon funds. He was stealing approximately $40,000 per month, routing it through Cayman shell companies before converting to cash and cryptocurrency. That matches what Isabella found. Yes, but here's where it gets complicated. Deshawn pulled up a document on her tablet. Pritchard claims he wasn't working alone. He says someone at Preston Holdings approached him 18 months ago with a proposal: use his technical access to create vulnerabilities in their financial systems, and in exchange, he'd get 20% of whatever they stole. Miles felt his tactical instincts spike. Who approached him? He claims he never knew their real identity. All communication was through encrypted channels, dead drops, anonymous payment. But he does have records, dates, amounts, message logs that we're verifying now. Martinez pulled out her own folder. According to Pritchard, his partner at Preston Holdings was the one who escalated to kidnapping. Pritchard wanted to just disappear with his cut, but the partner insisted they needed to neutralize Isabella Grant permanently because she was getting too close to tracing the money back to its source. So Pritchard hired the Webb brothers? No, that's the interesting part. Deshawn leaned forward. Pritchard says his partner arranged the kidnapping independently, using Pritchard's connection to the Webb family, but without telling him the full plan. Marcus Webb, the gray hoodie you've been encountering, is James Pritchard's cousin. Pritchard had mentioned him casually in a message, just family conversation. But his partner apparently saw an opportunity and reached out to Marcus Webb directly, offering $25,000 to grab Isabella Grant. Miles processed this information, feeling the case shift beneath him like unstable ground. If Pritchard's telling the truth, then someone inside Preston Holdings orchestrated everything. They used Pritchard's access to steal, then set him up to take the fall while they stayed hidden. Exactly, Martinez said. And that someone is still out there, still has access to company systems, and probably knows we're closing in. Who fits the profile? Who at Preston Holdings had both the technical knowledge to coordinate with Pritchard and the authority to move large sums without immediate detection? Deshawn pulled up personnel files on her tablet. We've been analyzing this all morning. The person would need executive-level access to financial accounts, understanding of cybersecurity protocols, and motive. That narrows it to about 6 people: Robert Chen, the CFO, Linda Marsh, the executive assistant, 3 vice presidents with budget authority, and 1 person we initially overlooked. She turned the tablet so Miles could see. The photo showed a professional headshot of a woman in her 40s with sharp features and calculating eyes. The name beneath read Sarah Chen, VP of Operations. Sarah Chen is Robert Chen's younger sister, Martinez explained. She's worked at Preston Holdings for 12 years, climbed from financial analyst to VP. She has comprehensive access to company systems, understands the technical infrastructure because she helped design their financial protocols, and she's been under financial stress for years. What kind of stress? Her husband has stage 4 cancer. Medical bills have destroyed their savings despite insurance. They've mortgaged their house twice, maxed out credit cards, and she's been selling assets to pay for experimental treatments. Martinez's voice carried sympathy mixed with professional detachment. Classic motive for embezzlement, desperate need for money, access to funds, rationalization that she's borrowing, not stealing. Miles studied Sarah Chen's photo, comparing it against his memories of the past few days. Had he seen her at Preston Tower? The name was vaguely familiar, but the building employed over 1,000 people, and Miles interacted with maybe 50 regularly. How does this connect to the chat logs Kowalski found, the architect and engineer messages? We think Sarah Chen was the architect, Deshawn said. She designed the overall scheme, recruited Pritchard as her technical partner, and orchestrated everything from inside Preston Holdings. When Isabella started investigating, Sarah panicked and escalated to kidnapping. But she was smart about it, using Pritchard's family connections, maintaining plausible deniability, setting up her own brother as a potential scapegoat if things went wrong. Her brother? Miles felt a chill at the calculated cruelty. Robert Chen was being framed by his own sister? Looks that way. Sarah had access to Robert's authorization codes, could forge his signature on financial documents. If we'd arrested Robert, she would have had time to finish covering her tracks and disappear. Martinez shook her head with grim admiration. It's actually brilliant in a sociopathic way. Frame your brother who's already under investigation, let him take the fall while you play the grieving sister shocked by his betrayal. Miles stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city while his mind reorganized the case around this new center. Sarah Chen as the architect made sense. She had everything Pritchard lacked: inside access, authority, detailed knowledge of company operations. And the cancer diagnosis provided both motive and deadline. If her husband was dying, she might have calculated that prison time was worth securing his final months in comfort rather than watching him suffer in a county hospital. "Where is she now?" Miles asked. Martinez and Deshawn exchanged looks. "That's the problem," Martinez said. "We tried to bring her in for questioning an hour ago. She wasn't at her home, wasn't answering her phone. We've got surveillance on her house and an APB out on her vehicle, but Miles, she knew we were coming. Someone warned her." "Pritchard?" "He's been in custody since yesterday with no outside communication. Couldn't have been him." Deshawn's expression darkened. "Which means someone else in the investigation is feeding her information. Either someone at Preston Holdings with access to the case details or someone in law enforcement." The implication sent cold dread through Miles's chest. If Sarah Chen had a source inside the investigation, she knew everything. Knew they'd identified her. Knew Pritchard had talked. Knew her window for escape was closing rapidly. And desperate people with nothing to lose made the most dangerous enemies. "Isabella," Miles said suddenly, "if Sarah knows we're on to her, she might go after Isabella directly. One last attempt to eliminate the witness who started this whole investigation." Martinez was already pulling out her phone. "I'll call her security detail, put them on high alert." But Miles's tactical instincts were screaming that high alert wouldn't be enough. Sarah Chen had proven herself sophisticated and ruthless, willing to hire criminals and sacrifice her own brother. If she'd decided Isabella needed to die, she'd have planned for it carefully, anticipated security measures, identified vulnerabilities. "Where's Isabella right now?" Miles asked. Martinez spoke quickly into her phone, then turned back. "Her security detail says she's at home. Apartment building in Lincoln Park, 24th floor, 2 bodyguards on station outside her door." That's not enough. Sarah Chen's had weeks to plan contingencies. She knows Isabella's building, her routine, her security protocols. If she's going to make a move, it'll be somewhere the bodyguards can't protect her. "The apartment's a fortress," Deshawn said. "Controlled access, security cameras, doormen. Short of a military assault, there's no way. There's always a way." Miles was already heading for the door. "I need to get to that building, now." Martinez grabbed her jacket and keys. "I'll drive. Deshawn, coordinate with CPD and FBI Tactical. If Sarah Chen shows up anywhere near Lincoln Park, I want units there in under 2 minutes." They ran to Martinez's unmarked sedan, racing through Sunday morning traffic with lights flashing and siren wailing. Miles used the drive time to call Isabella directly. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying confusion and the edge of fear. "Miles, Detective Martinez already called. My security team's on high alert. What's going on?" "Sarah Chen is behind everything. The embezzlement, the kidnapping attempt, all of it. She knows we've identified her and she's in the wind. Isabella, you need to get out of your apartment right now." The bodyguard said to stay put until... The bodyguards are protecting against standard threats. Sarah Chen isn't standard. She's former financial analyst with 12 years inside Preston Holdings. She knows systems, knows how to exploit vulnerabilities. If she wants to get to you, she'll find a way around your security. Isabella's breathing quickened. "What should I do?" "Get out of the building. Don't take the elevator. Use the stairs. Have your bodyguards escort you to a police station or FBI office, somewhere public and secure. Do it now, Isabella." Okay, we're moving." Miles heard rustling and urgent voices in the background. "Miles, how close are you?" 5 minutes. Just get out and keep moving." Martinez took a corner at 40 miles per hour, the sedan's tires squealing protest. They were weaving through Lincoln Park's tree-lined streets, past brownstones and luxury buildings, when Miles saw it. A white utility van parked on the street outside Isabella's building, its side emblazoned with city waterworks in official-looking letters. "There," Miles pointed. "That van. It's too clean, too new. Real city vehicles are beat to hell."
Martinez slowed, studying the van with professional suspicion. Could be legitimate. Or could be Sarah Chen's entry point. City utility access overrides building security. Doormen let them in without question. Miles was already unbuckling his seatbelt before the car fully stopped. Call it in. I'm checking it out. Miles, wait for backup. But he was already out of the car, moving toward the building with the controlled urgency that came from years of approaching potentially hostile structures. His senses sharpened, cataloging details. The van's engine was still warm despite being parked. No visible workers or equipment nearby, the rear doors slightly ajar. Miles approached from an angle, using parked cars as cover, and peered through the van's windshield. The interior had been modified, the driver and passenger seats remained, but the cargo area had been retrofitted with electronic equipment, laptop, radio scanners, what looked like building system override devices, professional gear for bypassing security. The building's front entrance was 50 feet away, an elegant Art Deco lobby visible through glass doors. Miles saw the doorman at his station, saw residents coming and going with Sunday morning coffee and newspapers. Normal urban life, completely unaware of the threat moving through their building's infrastructure. Miles pulled out his phone and called Isabella. Where are you? Stairwell, 18th floor, moving as fast as we can. Her breathing was labored from exertion and fear. Miles, what's happening? Sarah Chen's in your building. She used a fake utility van to bypass security. Do not go to the lobby. She might have people waiting there. Go to the roof. There's a helipad on top of your building, right? Yes, but we don't have helicopter access. Doesn't matter. Get to the roof and barricade the access door. I'm coming to you. Miles ended the call and ran to the lobby entrance. The doorman looked up with professional courtesy that shifted to concern when he saw Miles's intensity. Sir, can I help? Chicago PD, Miles said, which was technically a lie, but close enough to truth for present purposes. Did any utility workers enter the building in the last 30 minutes? Yes, 2 women from water department said they needed to check pressure valves on the upper floors. The doorman's expression shifted to worry. Is there a problem? What floor did they access? 24, that's where the main mechanical room is located. Isabella's floor. Of course it was Isabella's floor. Miles ran for the emergency stairs, taking them 3 at a time despite his knees screaming protest. Behind him, he heard Martinez entering the lobby, coordinating with building security and calling for backup. But backup would take time, and time was the one resource they didn't have. He climbed through the stairwell's industrial gray silence, his breathing controlled despite the exertion, his mind running tactical assessments. 2 women posing as water workers meant Sarah Chen hadn't come alone. She'd brought help, probably the same kind of criminal contractors she'd used for the kidnapping attempt. Armed, dangerous, willing to commit murder for pay. Miles reached the 24th floor and cracked the stairwell door, scanning the corridor beyond. Luxury apartments stretched in both directions, thick carpet-absorbing sound, elegant lighting creating shadows where threats could hide. He spotted 2 figures at the far end, women in municipal utility coveralls, one carrying a toolbox, the other holding what might have been equipment but could easily conceal weapons. They were moving toward Isabella's apartment where her bodyguards waited outside the door, completely unaware of the fake utility workers approaching from behind. Miles had seconds to decide. Confront the women directly, try to warn the bodyguards, or create a distraction that would pull Isabella's attackers away from their objective. Each option carried risks. Direct confrontation would turn the hallway into a battleground with civilians potentially in the crossfire. Warning the bodyguards required crossing open space where he'd be vulnerable. A distraction might scatter the threats but could also accelerate their timeline. He chose option 4, change the equation entirely. Miles pulled the fire alarm. Immediately, sirens wailed through the building, strobes flashed in the corridors, and automated announcements instructed residents to evacuate via the nearest stairwell. Apartment doors began opening as residents emerged in various states of Sunday morning dishevelment, confused and annoyed by the disruption. The 2 fake utility workers froze, their careful approach suddenly complicated by dozens of witnesses. Miles used the chaos to move closer, staying low and using evacuating residents as cover. He reached Isabella's door just as one of her bodyguards stepped out to assess the situation. Get Isabella and move, Miles said quickly.
Fire alarm's a diversion. Real threat is those two women in utility coveralls. They're here to kill her. The bodyguard's training kicked in immediately. He stepped back inside, speaking urgently to his partner, while Miles positioned himself between the approaching women and Isabella's apartment. Through the chaos of evacuating residents, he saw the women recognize that their plan had collapsed, saw them exchange glances and reach for their toolbox and equipment bag. Not tools, weapons. Miles didn't wait for them to draw. He grabbed an elderly resident who was shuffling past and gently but firmly pushed him back into his apartment. Stay inside. Lock your door. Do not come out. Then he moved toward the women with purposeful aggression, closing distance before they could establish defensive positions. The first woman dropped her toolbox and pulled a compact pistol from her coveralls. Miles was already inside her firing arc, too close for her to shoot without risking hitting evacuating residents. He grabbed her wrist, twisting the gun away while driving his elbow into her solar plexus. She folded with a wheeze, and Miles stripped the weapon from her hand, tossing it down the corridor out of reach. The second woman swung her equipment bag at his head, heavier than it should have been, probably containing additional weapons or tools. Miles ducked the swing and came up with a palm strike to her chin, snapping her head back. She staggered but recovered faster than he'd expected, revealing combat training of her own. She came at him with a combination of strikes, jab, cross, low kick, that forced Miles to give ground. Behind him, Isabella's bodyguards emerged with Isabella between them, moving toward the stairwell. The first woman Miles had disarmed was recovering, reaching for something else in her coveralls. Miles saw the glint of metal, a knife. He closed distance again, trapping her knife hand and delivering a controlled strike to her temple. She went down hard, unconscious before hitting the carpet. The second woman saw her partner fall and made a tactical decision, abandoning the attack and running for the emergency stairs at the far end of the corridor. Miles started to pursue, but Isabella called out, "Miles, let her go, we need to move." She was right. One threat neutralized was enough. They needed to prioritize getting Isabella to safety over capturing every attacker. Miles ran to where Isabella stood between her bodyguards, both looking at him with new respect and reassessment. "Elevator or stairs?" one asked. "Stairs," Miles said, "and not down. Up, to the roof, like I told Isabella." "The roof's a dead end. It's defensible and away from ground-level escape routes. Move." They climbed, Isabella in the middle of their protective formation, Miles taking rearguard position. The building's fire alarm continued wailing, creating acoustic chaos that made tactical assessment difficult. Miles couldn't hear if they were being pursued, couldn't distinguish footsteps from general evacuation noise. They reached the roof access door, heavy steel with a push-bar emergency exit. Miles shoved it open and ushered everyone through onto the roof, where Chicago's skyline spread in all directions under brilliant sunshine that felt surreal given the circumstances. The roof was a typical high-rise setup. Helipad in the center, mechanical equipment clustered near the edges, low walls providing minimal protection against the wind and vertigo-inducing views. Isabella moved to the center of the helipad, her bodyguards flanking her, while Miles positioned himself near the access door. "Barricade?" one of the bodyguards asked. Miles scanned the roof. "No good options. Door opens outward, nothing to wedge it with. We hold this position until backup arrives." As if summoned by his words, Miles heard the distant wail of sirens, multiple units converging on the building. Martinez would have coordinated a full response, CPD, FBI, probably SWAT given the circumstances. Help was minutes away, but minutes could be forever in tactical situations. The roof access door burst open and Sarah Chen emerged, holding a pistol with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. She wasn't wearing utility coveralls, but business casual. Slacks and a blouse under a light jacket, looking more like she was heading to a meeting than attempting murder. Behind her came two men Miles didn't recognize, both armed, both moving with the controlled aggression of hired muscle. Sarah's eyes found Isabella immediately. "Ms. Grant, I really hoped it wouldn't come to this." "Sarah?" Isabella's voice carried shock and betrayal. "What are you doing?" "What I've been doing for 18 months, protecting my family." Sarah's gun remained steady, trained on Isabella's center mass. "My husband is dying, Isabella. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live if we're lucky. The treatments that might save him cost $30,000 per month. Insurance covers maybe half. I was drowning in debt, watching the man I love suffer because we couldn't afford the care he needed. So you stole from the company? Isabella's shock was giving way to anger. You betrayed everyone who trusted you, tried to have me kidnapped, and now you're going to kill me? Because of money? Not just money. Survival. Dignity. The ability to say I did everything possible to save him. Sarah's expression hardened. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to choose between your principles and someone you love. That's not true, Isabella said quietly. But I chose differently. I chose not to become a criminal. Miles was calculating distances and angles, assessing his chances of disarming Sarah before she could fire. The bodyguards were doing the same calculations, their hands drifting toward holstered weapons. But Sarah's two backup shooters had them in a crossfire. Any move would result in multiple people getting shot. Stalemate. The worst kind of tactical situation where waiting was dangerous, but action was suicide. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, her voice taking on the calm authority of someone who'd thought through every contingency. Isabella, you're coming with me. We're walking off this roof, getting in a vehicle, and driving somewhere quiet where we can discuss your resignation and memory loss regarding certain financial irregularities. Your bodyguards and the janitor stay here, unharmed, as long as everyone cooperates. And if I refuse, Isabella asked, then I shoot you here and take my chances with the police. I'm not going to prison, Isabella. I've made peace with that. The only question is whether you die quick and painless or whether I take everyone on this roof with me when I go. Miles believed her. Sarah Chen had the look of someone who'd crossed a line and couldn't come back, who'd committed so fully to her course of action that death seemed preferable to surrender, desperate and dangerous. Sarah, Miles said, his voice calm and non-threatening, I understand what you're going through. Combat medicine taught me about impossible choices, about watching people suffer because resources weren't available. It tears you apart. Sarah's eyes shifted to him, recognizing him for the first time. You're the janitor, the one who stopped the Webb brothers. That's right. And I'm telling you, this doesn't have to end with anyone dying. You put the gun down, we all walk off this roof, and we figure out a solution. Your husband still needs you. He needs you alive and free, not dead or in prison. There is no solution. The FBI has everything. Pritchard talked. They've traced the money. They know about the Cayman accounts. Sarah's voice cracked slightly, the first evidence of the fear underlying her facade. It's over. I'm just trying to control how it ends. Miles took a careful step forward, hands visible and empty. Sarah, I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but the same calculation. Thinking the only options left are bad or worse, that you've gone too far to turn back. But there's always another option. Always. Don't. Sarah's gun shifted to Miles. Don't come closer. I will shoot you. I know, you're scared and desperate, and you see this as your only play. But think about your husband. You said you were doing this for him. What does he gain if you die on this roof or spend the rest of your life in prison? He loses the person he loves most. That's not protecting your family, Sarah. That's destroying it. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, her gun hand trembling slightly. Behind her, one of her hired shooters was getting nervous, his weapon tracking between Miles and the bodyguards, looking for threats everywhere. I can't go to prison, Sarah whispered. I can't leave him alone. Then don't, Isabella said, and her voice carried unexpected compassion. Sarah, put the gun down. Let us help. Preston Holdings has resources, legal funds, employee assistance programs. We can get your husband into treatment, get you the best lawyer in Chicago. It won't fix everything, but it's better than this. Sarah stared at Isabella, her expression cycling through anger, desperation, hope, and finally resignation. The gun lowered slightly, not all the way down, but no longer directly threatening. It's too late, she said. I've done too much, hurt too many people. It's never too late to stop hurting more people, Miles said. He took another step forward, now within arm's reach of Sarah. Give me the gun. End this before someone gets killed. For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Sarah Chen's face showed the internal war between surrender and final defiance, between accepting consequences and going down fighting. Then she raised the gun to her own temple, Miles moved on pure instinct, grabbing her wrist and twisting the weapon away while pulling her into a controlling hold. The gun discharged, the shot going wild into the sky, and Sarah collapsed against him, sobbing. Her two backup shooters raised their weapons, but Isabella's bodyguards were faster, drawing and establishing target acquisition. For 3 seconds, everyone was locked in firing positions, waiting to see who would shoot first. Then Martinez and 6 SWAT officers burst through the roof access door, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The hired shooters dropped their guns immediately, recognizing the futility of resistance. The bodyguards slowly holstered their weapons, and Miles carefully placed Sarah's pistol on the ground, keeping his hands visible while supporting the sobbing woman who'd just tried to kill Isabella and then herself. Martinez approached, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Everyone okay?" "No injuries," Miles confirmed. "But Sarah Chen needs psychiatric evaluation. She's suicidal." 2 officers moved forward to secure Sarah, handling her with surprising gentleness given the circumstances. She didn't resist, seeming almost relieved that the decision had been taken from her. As they led her toward the roof access door, she looked back at Isabella. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, the words carrying genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry for everything." Isabella nodded slowly, her expression complex with anger and sadness and pity. "I hope you get the help you need, Sarah, for you and for your husband." Then Sarah was gone, escorted by officers who would take her first to a hospital for evaluation and then to custody, where she'd face charges that would likely put her away for decades. The hired shooters were cuffed and led away separately, and the roof suddenly felt almost peaceful in the aftermath of violence that hadn't quite happened. Isabella walked over to Miles, her composure finally cracking completely. "I thought she was going to shoot herself, right in front of us." She almost did. The desperation, the guilt, the fear, it all converged in that moment. If we'd pushed any harder or waited any longer, she would have pulled the trigger. "But you stopped her." Again, Isabella's voice carried wonder and exhaustion. "How do you do that? How do you stay calm when everything's chaos?" Miles considered the question carefully. "I don't stay calm. I just channel the fear into focus. Combat taught me that panic clouds judgment, so you train yourself to feel the fear but not let it control your actions. It's not courage, Isabella. It's just practice at being scared while still functioning." Martinez approached, notebook in hand. "I need statements from everyone, but it can wait until we're off this roof. Let's get you all downstairs to somewhere more comfortable." They descended as a group, the building's fire alarm finally silenced, residents being allowed back into their apartments after bomb-sniffing dogs had cleared the structure. The lobby had been transformed into a command center, FBI agents coordinating with CPD, evidence technicians processing the unconscious woman Miles had disabled in the corridor, reporters already gathering on the street outside. Miles found a quiet corner and sat on a decorative bench, the adrenaline finally draining from his system and leaving behind familiar exhaustion. His knee throbbed where he'd stressed the old injury, his shoulder ached from the brief fight, and his head felt stuffed with cotton from processing too much intensity in too short a time. But he was alive. Isabella was alive. Sarah Chen was alive, and would hopefully get the mental health treatment she desperately needed. In the calculus of missions, that counted as success. Detective Martinez sat beside him, offering a bottle of water she'd obtained from somewhere. "You look like hell." "Feel worse." "I imagine. That was some impressive work up there. Tactical assessment, threat de-escalation, physical intervention. You did everything right." "Sarah almost killed herself. That's not right." "She didn't, though, because you recognized the suicide risk and acted. Miles, you saved 3 lives today. Isabella's, Sarah's, and potentially your own if that situation had gone differently." Martinez paused. "FBI wants to debrief you. So does CPD brass. And media is going to want interviews once they piece together that the janitor who stopped the original kidnapping also stopped the mastermind on a rooftop." Miles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of renewed attention settling on his shoulders. "I just want to go home." "I know. But first there's someone who wants to thank you." Martinez stood and walked away, replaced moments later by Isabella. She'd shed her fear and vulnerability, reverting to the professional composure of a CEO who'd survived corporate warfare and come out stronger. But her eyes still carried softness when she looked at Miles. So, she said, sitting beside him, this is becoming a habit, you saving my life. Hopefully not a habit we need to continue. Agreed. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Miles, I don't know how to thank you properly. You've put yourself in danger repeatedly, fought armed criminals, talked down a suicidal woman, all to protect someone you barely knew. The board wants to offer you another position, probably with an even bigger salary this time. And I'll refuse it again. I thought you might say that, Isabella smiled. So I have a different proposal. What if we created a position specifically for you? Not corporate security, not management, just you doing what you do, noticing things other people miss, responding to threats others don't see, protecting people who need protection. Miles opened his eyes, studying her carefully. That's a vague job description. It's intentionally vague because what you bring isn't easily categorized. You have skills and instincts that don't fit conventional corporate roles. So instead of forcing you into a box that doesn't fit, we create a new box. Chief Safety Officer or Director of Threat Assessment or whatever title makes you comfortable. What if Janitor makes me comfortable? Isabella's expression turned serious. Then you can keep that title. But Miles, you and I both know you're not just a janitor anymore. Maybe you never really were. What happened this week revealed who you actually are beneath the gray uniform. And that person makes a difference in ways most people never can. Miles thought about the past 4 days, about the choices he'd made and the lives he'd affected. He thought about the medals in his storage unit, the uniform he'd shed thinking he was done with responsibility and consequence. He thought about the soldier he'd been and the janitor he'd tried to become, and the person emerging from the collision of those identities. Can I think about it? He asked finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. The position will be there when you're ready. Isabella stood, preparing to face the bureaucratic aftermath of attempted murder and corporate crime. But Miles, whatever you decide, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything. She left him sitting in the lobby, surrounded by the controlled chaos of law enforcement processing a crime scene. Miles finished his water and watched the activity with detached interest, his mind already shifting from immediate crisis to long-term questions. What did he want? Not what others expected or what circumstances demanded, but what actually mattered to him. For 3 years, he told himself he wanted peace, quiet, anonymity, a simple life without stakes or consequences. But this week had proven that desire false. The moment real stakes emerged, the moment people needed protection, he'd responded with every skill and instinct he'd tried to bury. Maybe the question wasn't whether he wanted to be a soldier or a janitor. Maybe the question was whether he could find purpose that honored both identities, the protector and the humble servant, the warrior and the invisible helper. His phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Miles almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity made him answer. Mr. Carter? A male voice, professional and courteous. This is James Chen from the Chicago Tribune. I'm writing a story about the events at Preston Tower and today's incident. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions. And so it began. The attention, the scrutiny, the transformation from anonymous janitor to public figure. Miles felt the weight of it settling over him like a familiar burden. I'm not giving interviews, he said simply. I understand you're private, but this is an incredible story. Former Special Forces captain working as janitor, saves CEO not once but twice, helps solve major embezzlement case. People want to know who you are. Then they'll be disappointed. I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time. That's what heroes always say. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who cleans floors and occasionally stops criminals. If you print anything different, you'll be printing fiction. Miles hung up before the reporter could respond. Martinez reappeared. Media? Yeah. Gonna be a lot of that. You're officially famous whether you like it or not. She sat down again. For what it's worth, I think you handled this entire situation with extraordinary skill and judgment. If you ever want to join law enforcement, I'd write you the best recommendation letter in department history. Miles laughed despite everything. Everyone wants to give me a job. Because you're good at what you do. And in a world where most people run from danger, you run toward it. That's rare, Miles. That's valuable. it's also exhausting. So take a break. Go home, sleep for a week, let us handle the cleanup. You've earned it. Martinez stood to leave, then turned back. But Miles, when you're done resting, when you've figured out what comes next, know that you've got friends. Isabella, me, probably half of CPD by now. Whatever you need, we're here. She left him alone again, and Miles sat in the lobby watching sunlight stream through the glass doors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. The building had returned to Sunday morning peace, residents moving about their lives, the drama and danger already fading into story and memory. Miles stood finally, his body protesting but functional, and walked toward the exit. Outside, reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. Cameras flashed photos he didn't acknowledge. He pushed through the crowd with the same quiet determination he'd used to push his cleaning cart through Preston Tower's corridors. Steady, focused, unbothered by attention or dismissal. He took the L train home, sitting in a corner seat and watching Chicago pass by the windows. The city that had given him refuge 3 years ago, the city where he'd tried to disappear and ended up being found. He thought about Isabella's offer, Martinez's recommendation, the inevitable media attention that would follow. Most of all, he thought about the moment on the roof when Sarah Chen had raised the gun to her own head, the desperate calculation in her eyes as she weighed death against surrender. In that moment, Miles had seen himself, not the circumstances, but the essential question: what do you do when all options seem impossible? You choose anyway. You act despite uncertainty. You trust that doing something is better than doing nothing, even when the outcome remains unclear. Miles reached his apartment building as afternoon light turned golden, painting his marginal neighborhood in warm tones that made even broken sidewalks look almost beautiful. He climbed the stairs to his studio, checking the thread across his door frame from habit, finding it undisturbed. Inside, his sparse belongings waited in their usual places, unchanged by the week's chaos. Bed, kitchenette, card table. 3 years of deliberately minimal existence. It should have felt like home, like the sanctuary he'd built from anonymity and routine. Instead, it felt like a way station, a place between identities, neither fully past nor properly future. Miles sat on his bed and pulled out the $50,000 check Richard Preston had given him. Life-changing money sitting in his wallet, waiting to be cashed and converted into possibility. He could pay off debts, could travel, could buy time to figure out his next move without financial pressure, or he could invest it in something more meaningful than his own comfort. Miles made a decision. He called the community center where he'd been volunteering, teaching self-defense to at-risk kids who needed skills and confidence more than they needed lectures about staying out of trouble. "Marcus," he said when the director answered, "it's Miles Carter. I want to make a donation to the youth program, $50,000. Can you use that?" Stunned silence, then, "Miles, are you serious? That kind of money would fund equipment, instructor salaries, expansion into 2 new neighborhoods. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I'll bring the check by tomorrow. Use it to help kids who need what I can teach them." After hanging up, Miles lay back on his bed, feeling lighter despite the physical exhaustion. The money had been payment for heroism, for actions that didn't feel heroic in the moment, but apparently looked that way from the outside. Using it to help others honor that same instinct, to see threats and respond, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, felt right in a way keeping it for himself never would. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "When you're ready to talk about the job offer, call me. No pressure, no timeline. Just know the door's open." Miles smiled and set the phone aside. He'd call her eventually, would have the conversation about what came next and how to balance who he was with what others needed him to be. But not today. Today was for rest, for letting his body recover and his mind settle. Outside his window, Chicago's Sunday evening unfolded in familiar rhythms. Children playing in the street, neighbors gathering on stoops, the distant rumble of the L train carrying people to and from their destinations. Normal life continuing while Miles Carter, former Special Forces captain and current janitor, lay in his studio apartment contemplating the space between who he'd been and who he might become. The week had changed everything and nothing. He was still the same man who'd pushed a cleaning cart through Preston Tower on Thursday evening, but he was also the man who'd fought armed criminals, saved lives, and confronted the reality that some identities couldn't be permanently shed, only temporarily set aside. Maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to choose between soldier and civilian, hero and everyman, but to find ways of being both. To carry military skills into civilian life, not as weapons, but as tools for protection. To accept attention when it came, but not seek it. To do what needed doing without requiring recognition or reward. The janitor with a secret past. The hero hiding in plain sight. The protector who swept floors and occasionally saved CEOs. Miles closed his eyes, feeling sleep pulling at him with gentle insistence. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new decisions, new complications from the media attention and corporate offers and the slow machinery of justice processing Sarah Chen's case. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Today, Miles Carter had done his job. Both of them. He'd cleaned up the mess, literal and metaphorical, and he'd protected someone who needed protection. In the end, that was enough. The gray uniform hanging in his closet would be there in the morning, waiting to be worn again or set aside for something new. Either way, Miles would face it with the same steady determination he'd brought to every challenge this week. Eyes open, skills ready, committed to doing what needed doing. That was who he was. That was who he'd always been. Beneath the uniforms and titles and carefully constructed anonymity. And finally, after 3 years of hiding from that truth, Miles Carter was ready to accept it. The sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Miles Carter slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd fought and won and lived to face another day. Whatever came next, he'd be ready.